Hey everybody, welcome to Head to Head, a Star Wars show. We want to thank you guys for watching us. This week, we're going to talk about some Ahsoka Series news. We got a Mandalorian game tease by Ubisoft. Qui-Gon may be in the Obi-Wan series, believe it or not. Which droid would you rather have by your side, R2-D2 or K2SO? But first, it looks like George Lucas may be heavily involved in the Mandalorian Season 3. And it's all coming to you right now.
You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, it just seems like every single week we get more and more Star Wars news. It's crazy.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I mean, besides, of course, the topic we're going to get to in a minute, now they're talking about, where Thrawn's going to pop up. And, of course, we're going to get to that a little later, too, with the Ahsoka series. But is it surprising to you that there's just so much Star Wars news coming out all the time when the movies aren't even active anymore?
No, I mean, it doesn't. I think now with the release of, the titles of all these different series that are going to be forthcoming. And then, of course, now that we have the High Republic, officially out. And, as far as the book and, at least issue 1 of the comic. So I think that, now, we're starting to get a lot of different things. And of course, in the day of information, everything is starting to come out, now where a lot of people are kind of speculating, a lot of people are kind of talking about. And so there are some releases and there are some things. And one of the things I'm even kind of wondering about is the Bad Batch. Like, that's supposed to come out in 2021. I thought it was supposed to be January, but
I thought February 20, I don't know, I want to say 6 or something like that. Pretty sure that's when it is. I mean, we'd have to check that out. If anybody in the chat knows or wants to put it in the comment section, that's cool. And hey, if you guys end up liking this video, feel free to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, because we're putting out videos. We're actually putting out a lot of videos now, so that's pretty cool. So, all right, you ready to get to the main topic?
Let's go.
All right, let's do it. All right, so it looks like George Lucas may be heavily involved. That's what all the reports are saying anyway, in Mandalorian Season 3. So before we get into this, first of all, do you think that's a good idea or do you think that that's a bad idea?
I kind of go back and forth. One of the things, and, I'll kind of have my own question for you to serve in a second. But as far as this one, I think it's cool. I think he probably would have been better in season 2. But then again, we don't know what's going to happen in season 3 either. So, but I'm just thinking because of Grogu, we find out his actual name in season 2. Of course, you're bringing in people like Bo-Katan, you're bringing in Boba Fett. So season 2 had a lot of characters that kind of basically started off with George because, as we all know, George kind of started the Clone Wars animated series, and then he did that with Filoni, and then Filoni eventually kind of just ran with it. And then, of course, he spawned off Rebels. So my thing is, I like George for the story part, and I think he has, of course, he's the gatekeeper of all this stuff. All this stuff came from him in the first place. So, of course, he'll be the authority to find out some things, especially if we're dealing with Grogu in season 3, which I highly doubt we will be dealing with him heavily, but we don't know. So I guess it all depends on what's actually in season 3. Where they decide to go with it. The Mandalorian Wars, if they kind of bring up that stuff, I could see them kind of, hey George, what do you think about this? We're trying to bring this or connect these pieces together. Because once again, this is all taking place right after Return of the Jedi. So what was George's vision as far as Return of the Jedi? What was kind of going on in the galaxy during that time period, and what could be still kind of hanging out there? So it could be a good thing.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so because, you bring up some really good points. First of all, George Lucas undeniably being the creator of the franchise.
Right.
I think we can agree with that of all people, he probably has the right to be there. But more importantly, as you brought up before, one of the things that's really cool about The Mandalorian is the fact that this is the first thing, at least it seems to be the first thing in the Disney Star Wars canon, where George Lucas is actually not only more involved, because remember, he was involved in a little bit in Solo, and, he would do set visits and stuff like that. But what's really cool is this is the first time that he's had actually any significant involvement.
Yeah.
Like, he's really super, super involved in a lot of this stuff. It almost seems like even with the storytelling, I mean...
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think that it feels more like The Mandalorian is successful as it is because he is so involved with it.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Kind of like, do you feel that George should continue to write the stories for Star Wars? Because like right now we have all these different, people that's kind of course we got the High Republic books and all that stuff. And I get that you can kind of tell those stories, that kind of predates all the stuff that George was kind of originally writing anyway. But like anything kind of afterwards, after Return of the Jedi, dealing with these characters, especially the characters of Han, Luke, and Leia, we're still dealing with that time span. Now, whether they choose to explore it or not, whether, like you said, they can bring Alden Ehrenreich to come in and play a little bit older Han, or if you want to bring in somebody to replace Carrie Fisher as Leia, and then, Sebastian Stan as Luke Skywalker, if you want to start telling stories within that spectrum of post-Return of the Jedi to Force Awakens, you could. But do you think that George should be or should continue to write Star Wars material?
Yeah, I absolutely believe, and I've always believed. In fact, I thought it was pretty criminal that, not necessarily that they didn't use George's ideas for 7, 8, 9, but that he should have had more input. And certainly he could have helped with the writing of Rogue One. He probably could have helped with the writing of Solo. If not, actually give this guy maybe his own platform or whatever. Certainly he could have been involved in actually helping to write and helping to come up with some stuff. Maybe generating the stories. Somebody else could have written the script. There's just, I don't know, I think that there's just all kinds of directions that they could have gone, that they could have exploited. And it seems like they just shut him out.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point you made earlier, I think that's why The Mandalorian is so successful, is because they do consult George, and because of the relationship that Filoni has with George. And of course, Favreau highly respects George as well. And so I think because they have embraced him the way that they do, I think that's the reason why we're getting a lot of really good storytelling, because he's like, well, maybe you can do this, or, I would have them do this because, and then you have the direction, like Favreau and Filoni can interpret that and then kind of pass that on. But then again, you still have all these other directors too. We all often talked about how it seems like Lucasfilm is kind of creating their own training camp, I guess, for Star Wars directors, where we've got, Deborah Chow, and we've got, Bryce Dallas Howard, and we have all these different people. But see, when you bring George onto the set, now they're getting the experience that Filoni got, because now they're actually getting a chance to meet with the man, the guy who actually created all this. And I'm sure George has probably sat down with some of them at some point, like, hey, what is Star Wars like, when you created this, or what were you thinking when you made this character, and what would this character do at this juncture in their life? And so I think a lot of these different, it's kind of like that one big professor that comes back to school, and you kind of like, it's kind of like the final, you're like, okay, the big professor's coming, we have to make sure we're on our game. And I think that's kind of what's happening, on the Mandalorian set. And I think that's why we're getting such great episodes. And I think we're going to start getting some great series coming out of it.
Yeah, I hope so. One can only hope. By the way, I want to, say hello. Ronaldo is with us as usual every week. Our good friend Ronaldo tunes in, whether it's on our Monday or Friday show. Yeah. He's actually one of the consistent ones. And, I want to take the time to actually thank everybody that joins us on a weekly basis. We have a bunch of people, actually, that follow us regularly and comment. And sometimes people miss the live broadcast, but, of course, they go back and they watch the rebroadcast and send in a lot of really good comments, and it's really cool. Ronaldo actually says, in my opinion, I think it's a good idea. One problem with the prequels was that no one dared to give George an opinion or a suggestion. That's actually a good point too. Well, let me get the rest of this here. But in this case, I think Filoni and Favreau would give George suggestions, which would be a great improvement in his writing. I should point out that that's a strong point that I've been making for a while, and I know you've been making for a while, that the problem with the prequels isn't the fact that George wrote them or even directed them. Because let's not forget that this is the same guy that did do A New Hope. Now, don't get me wrong. I will never accuse George Lucas of being a really good director.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think that he is good enough, and especially when you consider this is his universe, this is his playground. But the problem with the prequels wasn't so much his storytelling or even his direction, although the actors tend to have wooden performances. The main problem was the fact that nobody would stand up to him. Everybody was pretty much a yes man to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that more than anything else, as Ronaldo points out, that's really what the big problem is. And in this case, you have Filoni and Favreau. Filoni, even though he was, he studied under Lucas, he basically became his own guy.
Right.
So he's not exactly the same person. It's almost like you can almost do the whole Obi-Wan Vader thing. When I left you, I was but a learner, but now I am the master. Well, maybe not quite to that level yet, but Filoni certainly has come into his own. And I think that, Lucas respects that. And I think that as you pointed out, people would actually benefit a great deal by having Lucas with them on the set.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, sure that, Filoni has definitely come into his own. He's proven himself as a phenomenal storyteller himself. And just like I said, just the creation of Ahsoka and how he's, just that one character alone, how he's taken her from this little kid and grown or has expanded her whole character into something magical, to the point where now she's even in live action and people want her own series. And, and that's a great deal due to Filoni. But I think, when we talk about George, sometimes, I think that a lot of people are kind of, and I can understand that because, like, in the prequels, Star Wars is already established. It's already iconic. So it's kind of like, well, do you dare test God almost in that, like, how dare you challenge me? Have you seen my movies, A New Hope, Empire, and Return of the Jedi? And of course, granted, he didn't direct the last two. However, these are my stories. And so, it's almost like that whole joke we always say, my friend here says it's fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, I honestly hope that George is more involved because certainly I think, as we said in the beginning, that you have to look at the fact that his involvement, I think, is partially what's improved the show. I don't think it's any accident that The Mandalorian is probably the fan favorite thing that Disney has put out. And yet it seems to have the most involvement from George.
Let me ask you this question. Do you think that, so there's some sports that are team sports and there's some sports that are, individually based, like golf. Golf is an individual sport, or tennis. But, you have other sports like basketball, football, soccer. Those are all team sports. Do you feel like Star Wars should be or is better individual or team?
I think that Star Wars definitely is more of a team sport when it comes to actually producing it, but I think that maybe it's more of an individual sport when it comes to writing it. See, I think that even though Lawrence Kasdan had a lot to do with writing the script to Empire Strikes Back,
mm-hmm.
I think that the fact that a lot of it came from George, and you can make the argument either way, honestly, because it's not like George operated in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
George definitely had the idea. He had all this stuff, but, Ralph McQuarrie basically is the one that came up with all the concept drawings that they're still using to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you had all these other people that were coming in. I believe even Stan Winston had some early involvement with the Creature Shop and all this stuff. So, I mean, there was there's just a bunch of different talents that came in. The special effects guys that had to basically invent it from scratch. I mean, let's not forget that Industrial Light and Magic was basically created because of Star Wars. The stuff that they wanted to do in Star Wars didn't exist, so they had to basically fabricate this stuff from scratch, and they actually created an effects company out of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's all very true. I guess what I'm saying is, like, with the storytelling aspect of it, because you have somebody like George, of course, he kind of has the overall picture of what he thinks Star Wars should be. But then you might have, like you said, the Lawrence cast, or just people saying like, okay, well, this doesn't work. So is it better? I think.
Yeah, in that case, absolutely.
And I think that's why we're looking at the Mandalorian, like, okay, you got Favreau and Filoni. It's not just one guy, just masterminding this. You got two guys with the assistance, even of George Lucas, kind of as a major consultant. So I'm thinking that, like, Star Wars kind of, when it comes to the storytelling aspect, I think it does work better as a team more so than individual, because now you can kind of fix the problems. Because I think if you are just a single person, you come up with this story, sometimes you become too close or too attached to that story. And you can't separate yourself to see the flaws and the weaknesses of it. But when you bring somebody else into that team who can kind of give it a fresh pair of eyes, as it were, I think you get a better product.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree at all, because The Empire Strikes Back is absolute proof of that.
Yep.
The Empire Strikes Back, I think, was the most collaborative. Return of the Jedi was to a point, but there was a little bit of trouble on the set, as we know, that was pretty well documented. But The Empire Strikes Back, I think, is the best of arguably the saga, but definitely the trilogy, because it did benefit from the fact that you had a team. First, you had George coming up with the story, but then you actually had people that came in and added their own input and came up with different designs. And, because, look, George Lucas would come up with, some creature or something and have some loose description, but it was usually up to the people in his visual effects team or different concept artists and things like that that would actually, they would come up with stuff, come up with designs, and he would go through and approve them or say, no, make this one a little bit furrier, or, do whatever. But generally speaking, you have to understand that George was the be-all, end-all. So he was the one that basically gave approval or disapproval. But certainly, yes, it was definitely a team sport, if you want to put it that way.
Ronaldo has some things to say. He said, plus it's nice to have George involved in such a beloved project as Mandalorian. The fans would be very happy. He also says, I think Star Wars is more like a team sport. In soccer, you have your best player, George, but at the same time, you need someone to give a good goal pass to, Dave and Favreau.
Yeah, well, that's part of my point, and you made the same thing, actually, by initially comparing it to the team sport in the first place, is the fact that, yes, it is good to have him involved in The Mandalorian, and the fact that you say, it's a beloved series, I think that George's involvement is part of the reason why it's such a beloved series. I think that maybe if he hadn't been as involved, it's really tough to say, because obviously, Filoni and Favreau are two super fans. Not only is Favreau a really great filmmaker and a good director and all this stuff in his own right, and of course, Filoni is a great writer. He understands storytelling. He understands Star Wars storytelling.
Yep.
Both of these guys, though, in spite of their backgrounds of being professional filmmakers, ultimately, is the fact that they're just super fans. They're super fans, and it's one of those things that I think that carries out in their work. And I think it's that love of Star Wars that's the reason why these guys are just knocking it out of the park constantly. Now, do I think that there's been a couple of missteps here and there? Yeah, sure. You can point to a filler episode here or maybe a shoehorned fan service there. But I think that ultimately, if you're really being fair and honest, you could say that this version of Star Wars really hits all the right spots.
Yeah.
And I think that fans are agreeing with that, and they're responding in kind, and that's why you had this super successful show. And I think what's happening is that Filoni and Favreau certainly are saying, let's maybe get more into this. You even have a thing to where these guys are becoming so powerful that apparently, this is still rumor at this point, but there's been a lot of people corroborating this, that Lucasfilm actually did want to fire Gina Carano, but Favreau stopped it and said, you're not doing it. Now, since when's he able to override Kathleen Kennedy? You know why? It's because he's producing the #1 show
I was just about to say
that they have,
yeah.
and it's kind of like, you know what? I mean, this is what I want, and you're pretty much going to give it to me because, fans are pretty much having a horrible outcry and are just dogging out everything that you guys are putting out. Sure, it's making billions of dollars initially, but on the back end of it, people are complaining about it and saying you're ruining my childhood. Meanwhile, you got Favreau over there going, hey, I'm making the stuff that's actually bringing people back into Star Wars.
I'm making people cry of joy when Luke Skywalker pops up, It's just
and then a Lucasfilm employee comes in and pretty much makes fun of him. So, yeah.
Exactly right.
I mean, I just think that you can't go wrong. I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand why people might be concerned about this because this is where I come from as far as the school of thought on basically bringing George back in. There's an inherent danger because you have, again, half the fan base will say bring him back, the other ones don't. Because remember, after he made the prequels, they were saying that Lucas was the one that destroyed their childhood. They were saying, look, you're the guy.
Right.
Let's let other filmmakers make Star Wars movies, and then that way, we can get variety, and it's not just coming from one guy. And those arguments are actually quite valid.
True.
On the other hand, people are also like, well, no, because he could end up ruining Star Wars with his crazy vision. And just one look at his outline for 7, 8, and 9, yeah, it was a little...
Too Star Trek-ish.
I mean, parts of it were kind of cool, but yeah, parts of it were like, what are you thinking, man? I mean, this is not really that good, at least not on paper.
Yeah. I think, the problem with, and this is the thing I love about Filoni, is because he's actually taken the time to really figure out the right mixture. So, myself being, a huge University of Michigan Wolverines fan, football fan, I believe that there is a system for winning at that school. Like there are certain elements that you need in order to win because that's just kind of the culture there. So I feel like with Star Wars is kind of the same thing. And that's like, okay, you need to really, and that's why I love that whole gallery thing that we watch, especially the first season of it, because you really start to hear like, man, this guy really understands Star Wars. It's like, yeah, it's not about the TIE fighters or lightsabers and all that stuff. Like that's the dressing or the sauce that kind of goes on it. But like the actual food or the meat itself of Star Wars is this. And when you can get that into the minds and heads and hearts of these directors and even the actors and actresses, I think that's when you start getting like a better project or better product, I should say, is because you're getting people who really truly get the world that you're playing in. Some people just think that Star Wars is like, oh, let's just, put on some robes and grab some swords and let's just force push everybody around and do a couple of flips and give a good line here or there and we're out of here. And it's not that. It's really just understanding like the different beats that this show has to hit and how it hits it and what the undertones of things are. It's like, this is what we're trying to convey. Sure, we may be dealing with some social issues that may be going on in the world. It's not always intentional, but if it does, so be it. There's so many things that kind of flows with Star Wars that I think now these directors are getting the chance to really understand that when they get a chance to sit down with George when he comes on set and they can ask him like, okay, so in A New Hope, like, how did you even, or what was your thoughts even just doing this part? Oh, well, yeah, I was kind of thinking this and Star Wars really is like this, and like Luke Skywalker started off being this, and this is kind of where I wanted him to go, and blah 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 blah, and then now I'm starting to like, okay, now I'm getting into your mind of what this whole thing was at that time. Now, now that I know where you started, I can kind of figure out how to end it. But like we said, even about the sequel trilogy, you don't plan that, and you have everybody doing whatever they want to do. Yeah, you get what you got, and I think that's one of the biggest things is that's really truly understanding what Star Wars actually is, and I think you need George for that purpose, for no other purpose alone, just for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, another thing that I would also point out is something that you brought up just a few minutes ago, and that's the fact that this is more like a training ground for directors and future filmmakers that may want to tackle their own Star Wars projects. One of the things that I think is really successful about what the Mandalorian series has been able to do is bring in, and this is where they've done it more successfully than the saga films, by the way, is that they'll bring directors in, and first of all, these directors seem to already be kind of super fans anyway, but Filoni and Favreau kind of guide them and give them a little Star Wars crash course, 101 type of thing, like, okay, this is what makes Star Wars, and this is what you need to do, and everything else, and then they go out and they make these really great different episodes. And this is proof that you can have a director that brings a certain thing to the table. Like Robert Rodriguez is known for a certain type or a certain tone of film, as is some of the other directors. I mean, you had Taika Waititi, who has his own spin. You have, of course, Filoni directing himself, and then I think Favreau even directed an episode in one. So,
yep, Deborah Chow, having her, that whole romance and kind of
I mean, everybody kind of exactly. They all had their own thing, but not only were they able to bring that into Star Wars, but they were actually able to tell a cohesive story arc throughout the season that didn't feel like you were watching a completely different series every week. Now, granted, some people may actually argue that point. I've heard arguments that some people didn't like the fact that, well, one week they're doing this and then they're going into a completely different direction. But I personally think that those are unfair criticisms.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that the fans have been talking about as far as, okay, we need to get away from George, we need to, have different directors. I agree. But I think once again, it's all about, we need to see something new that's not so derivative. Okay, I agree. We need to, all the different complaints that we've heard from fans, even some that we've even come up with, are true. However, I think we just need to, once again, plan. And I think that's the biggest way to do that is really thinking about, okay, how do we do this? How do we move from point A to point B? And let's do it very intentional and let's be very intelligent about it. So yes, let's get different directors, but okay, what type of directors are we getting? If we're going to get like people who are just super fans, that's great, but do they really truly understand Star Wars? Oh, they don't? See, that's the problem. Let's get them educated on how Star Wars works. Now it takes this, because they're going to listen to it, because they're super fans, so they're going to listen to it anyway. But see, if you give them that, now they can actually start making better films.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's one of those things that you have to just, it's kind of like you said, you bring people in, you coach them, you give them a little direction. But let's just say that they do then bring Lucas in like everything is said. And I mean, I think that it's safe to say this has all been almost confirmed. I mean, it's not,
right.
Nobody's making any announcements or anything like that. But one of the things that leads me to believe that this could actually be true is the fact that Lucas is already visiting the set a lot. He's giving ideas. I heard he actually gave the name Grogu. Like that kind of came from him. There's all kinds of different things that he's lending to the series, and this is something that wasn't really happening in the films. This is something that, I mean, sure, he would visit. He never visited the saga films. He would always visit the standalone films, and I thought that was really interesting too. But what would end up happening is he would visit, and it was almost like a ceremonial, well, let's show the guy that created this thing around and, give him a little tour and we'll see what we can do. But this feels different. His involvement in The Mandalorian feels different. It feels more official, and it feels more like he's really contributing something.
Right.
Versus just visiting an in-progress thing based on something he created.
Right.
And I think that that's the key.
Mother Vanessa says, hey, guys. Hey, everyone.
Yes.
Hey.
Hi. It's always good to have everybody. And I want to take this time, too, to first of all, if you guys are liking what we're doing and you like this stuff, like I said, we're coming out with new content. We're trying to come up with some different ideas. So if you guys have different ideas of different shows that, you think we should produce, by all means, let us know. If there's some topics or maybe there's a character that you want us to feature or talk about, certainly let us know. And, please hit that subscribe button and hit the like button on this video so we can, keep moving things along. But one of the things that I want to point out, just to wrap up maybe this George Lucas discussion, is that if George is actually going to be super involved in Season 3, what I really hope is that twofold. Okay, first of all, on George's end, I hope that he takes what he was doing in the original trilogy and then continues that. What would a George Lucas film look like after Return of the Jedi if he had made it at that time? What would the continuing adventures... Because one of the things that I really like about him being involved in The Mandalorian is it actually takes place right around the time of his original trilogy. Mm-hmm. So if he's the one that comes up with how Boba Fett got out of the Sarlacc pit, it feels more official to me. Right. It feels less fan fiction-y to me if he's the one doing that. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a very valid point.
I mean, that's one of those things. It's like all this stuff feels more official if he's the guy that's at least giving ideas, or maybe he's just approving and disproving. Like Filoni or Favreau will come up to him and say, hey, we were thinking that this is how Boba gets out of the Sarlacc pit, or this is how this happens, or that happens. And he's like, well, that's kind of cool. Well, that's cool. But, in his way that he does things. But
it's funny because Filoni kind of talks like that, too.
Yeah, that's true. I guess Lucas influenced him that way, too. But that would really be a cool thing to me, is that because it's happening right around his trilogy, the second thing is that, which is something we've been saying all along, is that he can then impart his Star Wars knowledge and his storytelling style and all this other stuff on all these people that are making it. And now, instead of just Filoni, you seed out all these different people, and then maybe we'll get some interesting Star Wars stories that definitely take Star Wars in a, not even necessarily a new, but maybe a different direction, or it could be a new direction. But at least it'll feel like the George Lucas, like it's in that spirit. You know what I mean?
True.
So what are you guys thinking? I mean, do you think that George Lucas being involved in Season 3 of The Mandalorian is a good idea? Or do you think, hey, he should just stick to his set visits and leave well enough alone? Let us know in the comment section. Of course, you can still let us know while we're live tonight, chatting with you guys. As you can see, we got a couple people in the chat already, so you guys want to join in, that would be great. This is all about Star Wars discussion. Like I said, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and everything, so we can keep making more content for you. All right, what's our next segment?
Next, we have Duel of the Fates.
I couldn't resist. I actually did a thing. I was kind of moving my head, cracking Daryl up. It's what I do.
Yeah, definitely.
What do we got?
So this week, I'm going to pit these two guys together. Which droid would you rather have, K2SO or R2D2? Now, I'm going to preface this. The reason why I brought this one up.
Yeah, that is. I'm glad that you're bringing this. I'm glad you're bringing this up. Of why you brought this up. Because I'm looking at this outline. Seriously. I mean, I got this. I got this a little late. I got this a little late, and, I was about to type up the graphics, as I usually do, and, kind of put everything together for the show. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, this is such a bizarre combination. I mean, I get it. I get it from a practicality standpoint, I think. You'll let me know where you're going with this, but this really was kind of a really bizarre matchup, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason why I picked it is because, K2SO was kind of a very beloved character as a droid. It was one of those few characters that actually could talk. Of course, got 3PO, and then you had that's not our what's Lando's little droid?
Something 3.
R3 or L3?
No,
L3. L3. So, I kind of wanted to put these two together because, in their own way, they kind of save the heroes, but they do it from a different standpoint, though. So K2SO has kind of been reprogrammed. He's more of a, an action fighter, kind of attack droid, whereas R2 is astromech. He's, Mr. Fix-It. But in some ways, or a lot of ways, R2 kind of gets into the mix, himself, as so. One, you can actually talk to. You feel kind of confident, like, okay, if you're going into a fight, you kind of want K2SO. But then if you are flying a ship and something breaks, you kind of want R2 around to kind of fix the problem. But you can only pick one of these droids. So which one would you rather have?
All right, I'll take a stab at this. So keep in mind that there are a couple of different things that you have to look at here. Number one, you would be tempted, as far as action stuff to go, for K2SO. I actually saw this a little bit differently. I thought that you were picking these because they're both, in a sense, even though one's an astromech droid and one's an old Imperial droid, it seems like they're, they can break into systems, they can do all this stuff. They're almost like that Swiss Army droid, kind of. Mm-hmm. Both of them. Even though they have different designs and they have different ways of
functions,
of carrying the stuff out. Yeah, absolutely. But the problem that I'm having, and you did this. The problem that I'm having with this is that you could say that, K2SO is this total action droid, and he's shown how good he is with a blaster when they finally gave him one.
Right.
And that he could pilot a ship, he could do all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you really stop and think about it, R2 is the one that's pretty much saved the galaxy in all 3 trilogies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe less so in the sequel trilogy. But, I mean, he did have that missing map piece, though. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he was a key figure even in that. But I think, I don't know, it's really tough because one of the things that's unfair about this challenge or this particular matchup is the fact that with K2SO, we only have one source for him, and that's basically Rogue One.
Right.
Sure, you get a little bit. I'm sure we're gonna, because I know he's gonna be in the Cassian Andor series, so we'll get him there. But I think the problem is that you can't understand R2 unless you have a translator.
Right.
Oh, this is gonna be tough,
yeah,
man.
Exactly. That's what I said. Like, there's pros and cons to each one of them.
Yeah, this is a good one. I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna, and okay, I would be tempted to say R2, but I'm going for K2SO, and here's why. Because R2 is a little bit more needy, in my opinion.
You said R2 is more needy?
He's more needy. He's more needy because he can't go over all terrain.
Mm-hmm.
He can't, there's just like, he has to recharge all the time, and you got to hook him up.
Mm-hmm.
You have to fix him if he doesn't, I mean, he has some self-diagnostics. If you get in trouble, he's very limited in how he could help you. I mean, there's a lot of different things that are cool about him, don't get me wrong. I just think that in this, when you factor in the fact that you can talk to K2SO can pilot a ship. And I know technically R2 can too.
Mm-hmm.
But K2SO could actually walk to the ship, get in it on his own, his own power, and then actually fly the thing. He can also fight. And even though R2 has been known to be in a battle, I think K2SO is ultimately going to be the better fighter than him.
Of course.
And there's just all kinds of reasons why I think that K2SO ultimately would be the better all-around companion.
Okay. That's a very good, compelling. Let's see. Mother Vansel says R2D2 is loyal, smart, and he's fun to be around and a good fighter. Ronaldo said this fight is better than Batman versus Superman. Really, I think if it's a quiet mission in a way, or if it's on the ship, I pick R2. But if it's a dangerous mission that requires hitting or infiltrating the Empire, I choose K2.
Okay, so what Ronaldo's doing, which is smart, but a bit unfair considering the nature of Duel of the Fates here, is the fact that what he's trying to do is like, you know what? I'm going to go situational. Now, notice we did say better all around, right? Like, which one would you rather have? Or in this case, since I had to shorten the graphic here, best companion. But the idea is all around. If you had to choose one, which would it be? Ronaldo's doing the smart thing. He's like, you know what? We're going to do it like this. I'm going to take R2 in this case, and I'm going to take K2SO in this case.
Yeah, he's like the utility belt.
Yeah, if I could have done that, I would have done that too. In fact, that's the exact answer I would have given. I would have just been like, yeah, all right, well, if it's this, then I'm going to take R2. If it's that, K2SO. I mean, why even limit yourself there, right? I mean, if you're going to do that, you might as well just say, I'll just take them both. You know, forget C-3PO. Give me K2SO and R2, and I'm good.
Ronaldo also says, by the way, the K2 model appears as an enemy in Jedi Fallen Order. It is very dangerous and capable against Jedi. It's also effective for protection.
Yeah, okay, this thing just popped up. Yeah, this is actually a good point, too, because, and you have to remember, this is something that everybody forgets, because he was with Cassian, but he is a reprogrammed Imperial droid. He was pretty much like an assassin droid or something. I mean, I'm sure the K stands for killer. It almost reminds me of those HK droids from the Old Republic, you know? So, I mean, I think that this is definitely one of those things where their whole purpose was basically for battle. They almost remind me of like these amped up hulking battle droids. You know, almost like a revamped version from the prequels.
All right.
Now, here we go.
I'm going to go with R2.
An actual battle.
Yes, an actual battle today.
All right, well.
Here we go.
Tell the class why you're going with R2.
I'm going with R2 simply because I think when it comes to a companion, I think I need somebody opposite than me. So R2 is better at fixing things. You know, he can go take care of stuff that I can't do. Like, I think I'm a pretty decent fighter, so I think I got that covered. But what I can't do is like, okay, if my ship is like, you know, falling apart, like I can't figure out what the heck it is. At least he can plug into the ship, talk to it, figure out what's going on. And then he actually can go over there. I mean, he's fixed the hyperdrive like how many times, you know? So I think for me.
Oh, wait a minute though. Hold on though. You're still not going to be able to do it. I mean, if you're talking about kind of like nature of fixing things, okay, he'll tell you what's wrong with it. That'd be no different than taking that little computer that you can hook up into your car, tells you what's wrong with it. You're still not fixing it.
Yeah, but R2 can though.
But K2 could too.
Nah, possibly, depending on what it was.
He was pretty resourceful, and he was plugging into every computer. See, this is why I thought that you were going with that at first, because one of the things that I actually like about K2 over a lot of the other droids that we've seen is that K2 actually seems like he has a little bit of an astromech thing going, where, you know, he could plug into different computers. Yeah, he can you know, all the kinds of diagnostic things. I mean, I thought that was actually, honestly, a really cool touch. I'm like, okay, finally. Because on one hand, it seemed okay in the Star Wars universe where they would have, you have your basically bipedal droids to do things like battle or interpretation or things like that. Some sort of companion thing. Maybe kind of like a servant droid or something. And then you have your other droids like your astromechs and your power droids and, you know, all these other things to do maybe more of the utilitarian type things or maintenance or things like that. Right. They're more suited. But what I like what they were starting to do with the K2 models is that they were sort of combining them. You never really seen, because the old Imperial droid actually looked more like sort of a, kind of like a combination of C-3PO and like a Death Trooper.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was one of those things that I just always thought was really kind of cool, was that they seemed to finally say, you know what, let's actually combine these, because you would think that in the Star Wars universe that somebody would think of getting these, well, basically combining. Why can't you have the best of both worlds? Why can't this droid fix stuff or just get some sort of a probe or something that can fit in? I mean, one of the things that I always thought was a little unrealistic to me is that R2 seems to have like some sort of a plug that can fit into any port anywhere. It's kind of like, even on Earth, it's like, okay, you have to have USB, and then so you got USB-A, USB 3, then you get Thunderbolt, which is kind of the same thing as USB 3, and then you have DisplayPort, and then you have all these stupid adapters for your computer, but now you got this one droid that's going to be able to plug into everything. I mean, I always used to say the same thing. It's like a Phillips screwdriver and a straight blade screwdriver. Why don't you just make them one or the other? Why all these different things? And of course, the answer, before everybody lights up the comment section, I know it's because of different things. And I guess that's why they do that with droids too, is that they serve a different purpose. But yeah, I don't even know what I just said.
Well, for me, R2, the other thing about R2 is what's cool about him is that he's unassuming. You walk in with some giant, K2 droid. I mean, like, it's going to draw a whole lot of attention. R2 is just kind of this cute little droid that just kind of rolls by, and yet he could be, he could have a whole bomb in him or something like that. You wouldn't know, because he's just an astromech droid. Like, he's very unassuming. So I figure that he can kind of get into areas where, okay, once again, if I'm trying to sneak around into some place, he's very unassuming. And like, my biggest thing is that he's a maintenance droid. He can actually fix, like you say, he can plug into things. That's his design purpose, is to fix stuff. So, like I said, he fixed, the Naboo fighter, not the fighter, but the Naboo ship that the Queen was on. That's when we initially saw him. He saved the Falcon, a couple of times. He's, helped Luke out in the middle of a whole battle. He's still, doing that stuff. He's rolling around, opening up doors and stuff. So he's more useful for me, because I figure like, okay, if I'm already, in the heat of battle, I don't have time to try to figure this stuff out, where I can send R2 to go do that. And then, I can kind of focus on the battle. But don't get me wrong. Like you said, you make a good point that K2, he is very useful, because yes, he does have some of those, utilitarian, aspects where he can plug in and stuff. But I think he just draws a lot of attention as well.
Okay, I mean, I'll go along with the drawing attention thing. I'll go along with some of the other stuff, but still, I just think that it's just really tough. I mean, this is a really, really difficult one, because, and it's one that's actually worth arguing too, because, and you do wonder, they don't really go through this a lot in the Star Wars movies, right? They don't usually sit there and, I mean, other than that one scene where the Jawas were selling some of the droids or whatever, trading to Owen Lars on the Lars farm, you don't really see a whole lot of instances where people are buying or selling droids.
All right.
They usually already have them, or they just, they kind of acquire them on their adventures or on their missions or something. Which is one of those things that I think is kind of cool too. But I almost wish they would delve more into this, because, even though it's a little bit nerding out in a way, it's kind of like, we always sit here talking about how, well, we're not really like the Star Wars super fans, like these crazy people and here we are arguing about droids, and could we see more about droid purchasing and financing and a little bit about how that works? So I could understand it if people are like, okay, guys, but this is a big hole. at least to me,
Mm-hmm.
in the whole Star Wars universe, because it leads to a bigger discussion. And that bigger discussion, not that I'm trying to, really like expand the Duel of the Fates here, but the bigger discussion really is, how do these people even choose their droids?
Well, I think the cool thing about R2 is that once again, he's fearless too. That guy, he'll zap anything. And he's quite resourceful. Like, all right, these battle droids were about to attack him, and he let out this whole oil, and then he set it on fire, and like he's really like very smart. He's quick on I can't say his feet, but his wheels, I guess. He comes with a whole lot of different gadgets in him. He's kind of like a little Q device from like James Bond. I mean, he's got like all these different attachments to him. He's got rocket boosters. He's actually saved, like you say, he's saved the main heroes on numerous occasions. He can pilot ships as well. Granted, he doesn't have the arms, but he can just interface whatever with whatever ship he's on and control it that way. So, I mean, R2 for me, and I think it's based upon, to truly answer this question, you have to think about what you're good at, and do you need something that's going to help?
That's my point. It's like, what are you? It's almost like they don't really explain it too well in Star Wars, in my opinion, even though you can get it by inference. But it's basically like you have to go by, what kind of a droid do I actually need? What fits either my occupation? Because, hey, if you're a smuggler, you're going to take a type of droid. If you're a bounty hunter, you're going to take one. A farmer, another one. A diplomat.
Yep.
There's all kinds of different droids. So depending on what job you have, it's also going to be a personality thing. Or it could be a skill-based thing. You're kind of like what you were talking about, where it's like, look, you're going to pick a droid based on what you're good at or what you're not good at, so that droid basically fills a void in there. Another good point, too, is that don't forget, one of the big things that R2 did was he had that little, this is where it got a little bit crazy with me, but when he busted out with that little circular saw in Return of the Jedi to cut him out of that net, I'm like, oh, come on, man. I mean,
hey, we don't know what's all in there.
Well, the other thing that I always found kind of stupid was because naturally he didn't fly in the original trilogy, and they had to explain that.
See, that one was like, I thought it was crazy, but I thought it made sense though.
It kind of, I don't know. I still go back and forth on that one. When he basically busted out with those jets, I'm like, I don't know, man. That's
well, I mean,
this is like Inspector Gadget now.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. It was a bit silly how they utilized it. However, it makes sense, though, because if you have a droid like that needs to get to a higher place, how do you get him up there?
Drugs. He could get to a higher place.
He's not human, Eric. It doesn't quite work on him.
No, you know what? I mean, that was the reason why I could hang with that scene. I can hang with that scene because it's like, okay, it was a clever way of him being able to like go up steps or
and I like the fact they even include that in Chopper too. Like most of those astromech droids had some sort of propulsion type thing
until the original trilogy, which apparently they were all damaged because that's how they basically explained away R2. Well, his jets got damaged. I'm like, look, this droid basically got blown up at the end of A New Hope. And then during the metal scene, he's all shiny like he just came off of the thing. Yeah, you mean to tell me at that point that they wouldn't have fixed his little jet propulsion system? Like that wouldn't have come in handy for the original trilogy guys? See, this is, and again, I get it. I know what it is. It's because they didn't have the technology to do that back in 1977, 80, and 83. Make no mistake, I understand. But it's like, if you're going to explain this stuff away, this is a time where I would almost say, you know what? Don't even try to come up with an in-universe.
Yeah, let's just let it just.
Yeah, just say, look, man, we made the movie in like 1980 or something, and now we're making movies like in the 90s and 2000s. Do the math.
Right.
I mean, it that's understandable.
Exactly.
On the other hand, though, I also understand the people that do say, well, we do need an in-universe explanation because, I mean, he goes from like using these jets, for instance, all the time to not using them at all.
Well, if you really think about it.
Was he a conscientious objector? It's kind of like, I no longer think that it's morally right to use my jets the way I've been doing it.
Somebody just told him to cool his jets, and he did.
Oh, man. Wait a minute. Which one is it? No, that's not it. That's it. That was it. So I knew it. So I hit the wrong button. See, an R2 unit would have hit the right button for me. Let's go to the chat for a second here. Ronaldo says, that's a good point. Probably one that one of us made like eons ago. You couldn't go down the street of Mos Eisley with K2 without attracting attention. It could be dangerous from bounty hunters or other things. Look, let's face it. You couldn't go down the streets of Mos Eisley without attracting attention with any droid.
Yeah, everybody's
period. I mean, everybody.
Pickpocketers and scoundrels and
and I mean, even an astromech droid. A lot of times, granted, like you said, they were a little bit more normal and utilitarian, but even an astromech droid, honestly, it almost seemed like in that economy, and again, I mean, I hate to keep belaboring this whole like financial thing about, I want to see credit card statements and how did
invoices.
how did they end up financing these things? But it really did seem like people were a little bit suspicious depending on what kind of droid they had, not based on the fact that, okay, this thing can carry a gun and blast me, but more that, how are you able to afford this or
what model that is? Like, oh, that's if you have an R2 model, that might be something like, oh, that's more expensive.
Well, and the other thing that you got to look at too is that some of these droids are basically used in the military, and they basically had definite military functions.
Yeah.
So, that'd be like, well, it's kind of a thing now, but civilians having all these like crazy automatic, and I'm not talking about just like an AR-15 or something like that, which is clearly kind of military. But I mean, if you go even more so, like you've got
AK-47s and
or military drones, or you've got like crazy guidance system, like
grenade launchers.
Yeah, like really high-end stuff that it's like, oh, come on,
What do you need this for?
Right, you really don't need this. And don't tell me you got a grenade launcher for home defense.
It's demolition work.
I mean, people are going to go there, but you know what? But yeah, I think that it says something about you, about what kind of droid that you actually have.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the kinds of conversations that a lot of Star Wars fans, maybe for good reason, don't have.
Well, maybe that's why they had that show Droids coming out too. That series.
What droids?
It's not the droids you're looking for. No,
no, that's right. They did mention something like that. Well, you remember that old show from, I showed it to you. The old C-3PO and R2-D2 adventures from like 79 or 81 or something like that. I can't remember if it came out in between New Hope and Empire, or Empire and Return of the Jedi.
Probably came out at the holiday special. But
it may have come out after Return of the Jedi even. Although it looked a little older. It looked more like a late 70s, early 80s thing. And you could be right. It could have been from the makers of the holiday special.
But no, they actually knew when when Disney kind of rolled out their whole new series, they had one called Droids. So that's
really, they had one. Yeah, I keep forgetting that.
Yeah,
there's actually a couple of them that we were going to cover, and we never ended up really covering. Like, we didn't even create graphics for them.
Like Rangers.
No, we didn't. Did we?
Yeah, we didn't cover Rangers.
Yeah, which is weird because that's like a big one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was. I forgot, man. Yeah, you're right. That whole droids thing that's going to come out.
Yep.
Well, who's the star of it?
Well, I don't know if it's really a series in the sense of like a Ahsoka type thing. I think it's more so.
It can't be. Well, I mean, hey, let's not forget they had that crazy, stupid 4 or 5 episode arc of those stupid droids on the Clone Wars.
Oh yeah.
Where I think was 3PO with them.
Yes. And they were trying to attack that ship. It was
and it was just like, and then they were like stranded forever, and it was just kind of like, how are we getting home? And it was, and this is back when it was like a weekly thing, right? So it wasn't like you can binge watch this stuff. And I remember I'd always be like really all amped up, like, oh man, I can't wait till Clone Wars, can't wait till Clone Wars, can't wait to see Obi-Wan and Anakin, and they're going on all these adventures, and hey, you know, we get the advancement of the story, like
Yep.
how's Palpatine getting his claws into Anakin, basically, and all this stuff with the Jedi thing. And what am I watching? I'm watching like droids trying to navigate through a sand planet. Yes, another sand planet. So another desert planet type of thing, trying to get home. And then it's kind of like, okay, you see that for what amounts to 20 minutes, 30 if you count the commercials. And it's kind of like, okay. And then they'll go next on Clone Wars, and then it's more droids going through sand and trying to get home. And it's like, how long? I remember saying this when it was on a first run thing. How long is this story arc?
Well, there was also the other one where like R2 got separated from 3PO and then he was lost, and they were trying to
yeah, like
they were trying to find
this is
him.
like a kid lost in a mall type.
It was like
of thing.
it was like not like a Home Alone or type thing, but with droids. It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that I just don't understand, man. I just sometimes when they would. What's funny to me about this is that there would actually be story arcs that were with the main characters that actually had real ramifications to the overall plot. And they would be shorter story arcs.
Yeah.
Like they'd be like 2 episodes or something. Or like you might have like 3 episodes with Anakin when they went and saw the father and the son and the daughter and all that stuff. And yeah, you had that was like 3 or something. But yet you have droids stranded on a planet for 5 episodes. You know, like a quarter of the season. It's like, I don't understand that. But I don't even remember why I got started on that rant, to be honest with you. I'm sure it had something to do with this. But
Well, we were just talking about the fact that, you know, they had a new show called Droids, and we don't know exactly who's the star of it and all that, but.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's how we did it. Yeah, well,
Follow the breadcrumbs.
Yeah, I'm still not sure. Well, if any of you guys know who are supposed to be the featured droids in this new droid series, you know, let us know. And, of course, if we care enough to actually go look it up and maybe even do a show on it. Because, again, we are looking for some topics for our Monday shows in particular. I mean, our Friday shows generally are whatever's happening. But our Monday shows, we like to feature all kinds of different things, and they're single topic shows, and we just, you know, talk about whatever. They're a lot more informal than our Friday ones. So, you know, be sure to check those out. Yeah, and if you guys know the answer to that, I'm sure Daryl's looking it up because he's looking very intently in his computer right now. You can see that. But yeah, you know, let us know. And I think...
To answer your question from earlier, it was 85.
Really?
Yep. The Adventures of R2 and C-3PO was from 85.
Wow, man, the animation looked a lot... It looked a lot more archaic than something from 85. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's not like 85 was, you know, last week or anything like that. Ronaldo says that droid story arc from Clone Wars is very boring. See, he gets it. Mm-hmm. And I understand it's George's favorite. See, there you go.
Yep, see?
Right there. This is why you have to be kind of careful what you let George Lucas do. Because don't forget, Jar Jar was George Lucas's favorite character too.
Well, your mom wants us to actually, you know, cover him.
For what?
Well, if you look in the chat, when you asked about, you know, if there's any character and thing you want us to feature, she mentioned Jar Jar.
Oh, I see it. Yeah, I'd like you to feature Jar Jar. He is comic relief, but he is also a main character. Yeah, there's lots of characters that are main characters. But I don't know if I necessarily want to do a whole feature. I mean, it could be fun.
And we did the holiday special.
Yeah, I guess when you're doing the holiday stuff, yeah, you know, you're not really setting the bar pretty high for that. I mean, once you do a whole show, and not only did we cover the holiday special, we watched it in real time. You guys go back and look on our channel if you missed it. It's pretty hilarious. Me, Daryl, our friend Dave, actually watched it in real time, and we show it. See, I mean, we're nowhere near the 4,000 subscribers you need to actually monetize the channel. But if we can monetize the channel, we couldn't even do that because we ended up with a copyright strike. Although they didn't take any action against us, and it's still up there. So you can watch it in real time with us and, us making our comments about it.
Well, let's see. A Droid Story, that's what it's called. And it's the two most popular droids from Star Wars universe are coming together for a new animated series on Disney+. A Droid Story will feature the droid duo of C-3PO and R2-D2, as well as a mysterious new hero. It will be produced by Lucasfilm Animation and ILM, and will launch exclusively on the Disney streaming platform.
So what'd you think of the droids of the sequel trilogy?
I like BB-8. I thought BB-8 was cool in, in that kind of cute kind of way, but I didn't really find him particularly useful.
Yeah, I know. That was kind of weird, wasn't
like,
it?
Chopper was cool, like in Rebels. Like but he's like another R2 though. So.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Chopper's like kind of like a mixture. Yeah, he's like a mixture between R2 and HK-47 or whatever that old Republic droid was, or maybe Mr. Bones or something that, is a droid that keeps telling you about how it wants to kill you. Or there's, in the Darth Vader comics, there's actually a droid that just loves killing. He's like a C-3PO type droid, a protocol droid, but he's like, he's homicidal though.
Yeah.
And he can't wait, he's with Darth Vader. He's basically probably what C-3PO would have been if Vader built him instead of Anakin, if that makes sense. But that is just like so weird to me, though, that they're actually doing a whole series based on R2-D2 and C-3PO.
I think they were doing almost like the 85 thing. I think that's just a newer version of the 85 show, but it's animated, though.
Well, I mean, and it could be. I don't know. And I mean, as far as the sequel, I agree. I don't really think the BB-8 was all that useful. I mean, he was...
And then Dio was pointless.
Dio was completely pointless.
I don't even know I even put that Slurpee cup in there. Just like...
I mean, that was the other thing, too. I mean, it was kind of...
It was cute.
It was cute. And I mean, I was even moved to tears at one point, I remember, when he was kind of like... He was kind of like an abused droid. I mean, this is the height of social justice warrior... input into the Star Wars stuff. It's like, okay, now we're gonna put an abused droid in there. It's like, really, an abused droid? I mean, come on.
Essentially, it's an appliance.
Basically, right. It's basically like saying your toaster was abused and I mean, it's just
plug them in too roughly or something.
I can't get behind some of these things that
yeah.
These people are saying. I mean, it's just
the droids. Yeah, I mean.
And that kind of ruined it for me, too. I mean, on one hand, right, the emotion of it kind of got to me a little bit. But on the other hand, then I started thinking about it like, okay, really? An abused droid? This is what you're giving me in The Rise of Skywalker, which it was, right? It wasn't The Last Jedi.
Yeah, The Rise of Skywalker. Well, yeah. The Dio, yes. Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, you couldn't. These are the, you know what? I'm just going to the chat. Ronaldo says, J.J. Abrams had the idea to put Jar Jar's skeleton, yeah, I remember this, in the Jakku Sands in Episode 7. He hates the prequels. Well, yeah, turns out...
Papa George probably was like,
Yeah, I don't know what actually stopped that.
I think it was George Lucas, though, because, because he did consult George a lot on, those movies as well.
Well, it's a good thing that he didn't do it, too, because we got what I consider to be the even better prologue or epilogue for Jar Jar when he was basically like the equivalent of a clown at kids' parties that they featured in the Aftermath trilogy.
Right.
Which I believe it was actually in the Aftermath book. She had Aftermath, Life Debt, and Empire's End. It could have been in Life Debt. It may have been, but I'm pretty sure, though, that it was in Aftermath. But it's in one of those two. I know it's not in Empire's End. But it is interesting. I mean, if you guys, I don't know, if we, do something weird and actually decide to do a feature on Jar Jar, I guess we could talk about that more in depth. But, from our point of view right now, why don't you guys just let us know? I mean, we've heard from our people in the chat. Certainly, if you guys are watching, you're just kind of lurking and you're not really chatting or whatever. If you want to put something in the chat, let us know. K2SO or R2D2. If you're watching this on the rebroadcast, let us know in the comments section. Are you leaning a little bit more towards K2SO, or do you think R2D2 would be the better companion? And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and help out the channel. All right, so are you ready to get something to drink? I mean, I'm way ahead of you. I got to say that I got this little, well, I'll talk about it in a second. Here we go. All right, so we are in our Cantina segment, and this, of course, is where we talk about a lot of general Star Wars news, and we tend to drink a little bit. I actually have this cup that looks like a Canon 24 to 70 millimeter lens, f2.8 for all you film geeks out there, or videographers. This thing is actually really cool. I mean, it looks like the real thing. I mean, it's probably hard to see from here, but trust me, all the markings, everything is there, so...
Yeah, man. I will say he almost got me with that one.
I almost got him with that one. But it looks like we got some more Ahsoka series updates.
Yeah, dude, man. This is actually kind of cool.
I hope so.
So, we've been hearing a lot of different things about Ahsoka. So, there's two big stories. I'll release the first one. I guess I'll let you release the one that you sent me the other day.
Oh, yeah.
So, we know about, Rosario Dawson is going to reprise her role as Ahsoka Tano in the TV series Ahsoka. But there's also some information that we could see another Clone Wars character with Rex actually popping up in that series. And then, let's see, also, there was some information regarding, I just lost it. Okay. Ahsoka Tano is actually, could be actually one who actually partially trained not Baby Yoda, Grogu. They're actually going to they're actually hinting that she actually had something to do with training him, beforehand. That's how she kind of knew who he was, but she didn't kind of want to let that on. We don't know if that's actually true, but it's a possibility. And then she's going to continue her search for Ezra Bridger. And then, what was the last part?
I
just had it.
Well,
talk about that for a second.
While he's looking for that.
I just had it.
Yeah, I mean... Pretty much, the only thing that I was reading, so last night I was just perusing, or maybe it was the night before, but I was perusing through a bunch of the articles like I usually do, because, I mean, something new on Star Wars pops up, it seems like almost every day now. It's crazy. It's like when these prequels were being made back in the 90s, early 2000s, well, I shouldn't really say that, because the world was a little bit different then. But certainly when the whole Disney sequel trilogy was being made, you didn't have as much news as what's being out now. It seems like every day, like I said, there's something new. And it turns out that they have all but confirmed. I mean, Disney hasn't come out and said this yet, but a bunch of sources close said, yes, it's confirmed. I'll get it out in a minute. That, is it Lars Mikkelsen?
Yes.
He's the one that is signing on the...
Mads.
Is it?
It's Mads Mikkelsen.
Mads Mikkelsen.
Lars is the one who played Galen Erso.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, anyway, let's just put it this way. The Mikkelsen that basically voiced Thrawn in Rebels is going to play him in live action, which that is exciting because that's exactly what I wanted to happen. And it turns out, and this is why we can talk about it in this segment. Well, we can talk about it anyway because we could do whatever we want. But where it actually is relevant in this segment is apparently that's going to be in the Ahsoka series. So the cool thing about the Ahsoka series is that it seems like the Ahsoka series could almost be as jammed up as The Mandalorian is. You know, we were always looking at The Mandalorian as kind of being the springboard for all these spin-off series, and certainly I think that's going to continue to be the case. But let's face it, the Ahsoka series looks like some pretty cool, crazy canon stuff is going to be happening in that.
Yes, and that's why I'm glad I finally found it.
Does that actually segue into your...
Yes, it does.
This is what pre-show prep will do for you, everybody. Take it away.
I actually had it. whatever, and it flew off my screen. I was like, what the heck is it? All right. So the cool thing about the Ahsoka series is that it's actually going to be kind of dubbed as the Rebel sequel, because they're actually taking a lot of Filoni and Favreau, well, more so Filoni, had stories and scripts for a sequel to Rebels, but since they didn't want to do it, because remember we talked about that, about how like, man, we wish there was like are they going to do a? Because there was a talk there was going to be a sequel to Rebels, but
that was the early thing, I thought.
Yeah, that's what it was. They're saving it. They were saving it the whole time because I guess they were thinking about Ahsoka going live action, and so that's what this is going to be pretty much going to be about, is that it's going to be a Rebel sequel, and they're actually going to use a lot of the original scripts that they were going to use for the animation. Also, where they bring in Sabine. So this is where Sabine's probably going to come in.
Well, and even though it would make total sense for Sabine to come in The Mandalorian. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm glad that Sabine is making her debut more in Ahsoka than jamming up The Mandalorian, even though I contradict myself all the time when I say that, because actually Sabine would fit very well, and in all honesty, story-wise, probably should be in The Mandalorian. Because if you're talking about the Darksaber, if you're talking about, okay, we're gonna talk about the future of Mandalore and who's gonna rule it and all this stuff, I mean, Sabine seems like she should really be in the equation here.
Well, I think there might be somewhat of a crossover, because I could see, let's just say, just speculating here, but okay, let's just say Thrawn pops up in The Mandalorian. He kind of goes after Moff Gideon, maybe gets him out. Somehow, Thrawn actually acquires the Darksaber, and then now, in the Ahsoka series, now you have the whole gang back. Now you have Ezra, Thrawn, Sabine, and Ahsoka, and so then now you can actually have Sabine trying to acquire the Darksaber again.
Well, I do remember that there was talk about the fact that Ahsoka was going to happen around the same time as The Mandalorian. I think it's Ahsoka, The Mandalorian, and Rangers of the Republic, where they were all going to basically occupy the same time period or era, which I actually think is a smart move, by the way, on their part, because one of the things that I always thought was weird is that they'll have all these series and they'll take place in these completely different eras, and everything's disjointed, which up until this point, I haven't necessarily faulted them for that, because you want to cover as much of the Star Wars time and landscape and all that as you can. But at the same time, I also thought that it would have been cool if they had some things taking place during roughly the same era, so that way you could have a little bit of crossover. And now we're starting to see that. Now we're starting to see that you're getting characters jumping from one to the other. You could do story arcs that can go from one series and jump to another. Or as you pointed out, you could actually have, say, Thrawn gets the Darksaber in The Mandalorian, but then he pops up in Ahsoka, and there's the fallout there. So I definitely think that there's a lot of room for them to not necessarily go crazy with it, but definitely tell a larger story. So what you have is, within each season, let's say, whether it's season 3 of The Mandalorian and season 1 of Rangers and Ahsoka, you could have the story arcs that happen within each series that spread across that season, and in some cases actually spread across multiple seasons.
Mm-hmm.
But then you can also have an even wider story arc that goes across series.
Yeah, because I think we're seeing that a lot in different TV shows now. One being like a lot of the live action DC stuff, where you have like Arrow, Flash, Supergirl. I know they've done some crossover episodes where those characters pop up in other people's series. So like you'll have Supergirl pop up on the Flash, and then vice versa. And then you also even see it in other shows like so you have like 3 separate shows: Chicago PD, Fire PD, or Chicago Fire, and then I think that's whatever the medical one is. It's a Chicago Med or something like that.
Yeah.
But, so you have like all these 3, main characters, like the chief of police, and then you have the fire chief on that show. but sometimes they'll cross over into each other's shows and help each other out with different things. So there may be some case where there's like an arson or something, and they can't figure out, well, okay, well, where does this type of, chemical come from? So he'll pop over to the fire department and meet with that chief, and it's like, whoa, that's a dude from Chicago Fire. But so I think they're kind of doing that, and that's kind of cool because when they're all occupying the same space and you kind of establish that world, now it doesn't seem odd if those characters kind of pop up in each other's series.
Oh, yeah, I totally know what you're talking about because, and this is something that was done, I know there were other series. Look, there were even comedies in like the 90s, like Wings and Frasier. I remember there was a crossover episode there. But Law and Order, they were notorious for this. Like, it would start in Law and Order and then pick up on a completely different series. I forgot what one. There's one that they always would do, but they would even jump. So you get like SVU there would be the start of an episode there, and then the episode would conclude and say like the original Law and Order or something. I mean, they were always doing stuff like that, and I thought that was really inventive.
Yeah.
So certainly they could do that in a Star Wars thing, sure. Ronaldo's got a bunch of stuff he wants to say. This news did not surprise me. Ever since I heard Thrawn's name drop, I always assumed we were going to see what happened after Rebels. I mean, that makes sense because obviously in this canon, that was where he was introduced. He says, my biggest question is what role does the world between worlds play in this series? And I'll get to that in a second. And then, of course, Eric, when I saw your water bottle, I said he's holding a thermal detonator. Well, actually, now wouldn't that be cool? I end up blowing us up like right in front of everybody live. I'd want more viewers watching simultaneously. But the world between worlds thing is actually a good question. Now, let me start out by saying that at first I thought that this was a misstep. I actually had thought when I first saw the Rebels episode that, I don't know, this is starting to go in a weird direction. It's moving too far away, in my opinion, into what Star Wars is and what it should be. But actually, as I got to live with it for a while, I started liking the concept of the world between worlds. My opinion is I think they're going to stay away from that for a little bit. I don't think that they're going to touch that because it's a little too strange. And it's also a little too weird. To do that in the live action too, you would start having to get some of the original trilogy characters back. I mean, if you really wanted to sell it, right? You had to sell, we're going back. I mean, granted, they could probably do... Maybe they can introduce a little scene of the High Republic or something, you know?
Well, I think in the world between worlds, I could see them kind of doing that because in something like Ahsoka, though, it would fit. Because one, unless you're a fan, Ahsoka is really geared towards true Star Wars fans anyway. So 9 times out of 10, most of those people know about the World Between Worlds episode anyway. But then if you're watching it, I think it's kind of cool because when Ezra shows up, it's like, okay, he's always kind of had this, his force abilities are kind of different too. He's one of those characters, if you really pay attention to, he kind of has some different force abilities. Like, okay, the whole talking to animals type thing. Like, we never really seen that before in Star Wars. Sure, we know that it exists, but
that's right. I forgot all about that.
But yeah, like he's communicating with the space whales.
It's like Aquaman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or like Prince Namor or something like,
Yeah, I mean, it's like really weird. Well, and you do bring up a good point, though, with the world between worlds could show up in the Ahsoka series.
It makes a little bit more sense because then once in that type of spectrum, you can, if they're going to do the whole retcon of the sequel trilogy, that's where you would do it.
Well, you have to do it that way.
Exactly. And
you have no choice. You have to do it that way. And correct me if I'm wrong, but was Ahsoka the one that actually went to the world between? I think she was the only one.
Well, see, remember Ezra pulled her into it because it was that battle with Vader. He pulled her out of that battle before she died. Because remember, we were trying to figure out, like, well, how did she even end up Mandalorian anyway because we thought she died in Rebels when she fought Vader.
Yeah, I do remember something about that where they actually dealt with it. And I think that was how they dealt with the world between worlds.
But
was
that's
it
how,
not?
and that's how we got Ahsoka still alive at this time period.
Yeah, that's how they explained it in Rebels.
Because Ezra pulled her out of that battle before Vader killed her.
Right.
So then now because of that, you kind of set other things in motion now. You essentially changed the will of the Force at that point.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, you could, in a way, they sort of retconned what would have been a future, even though they didn't have to retcon it because they didn't make it. But they seem to be going in one direction with the series and then try to explain it away because no different than the infamous Dallas thing where they killed off Bobby Ewing and then they did a whole series when he had left the show, but then he came back the next season. So they explained the whole thing that it was a dream. In fact, I think that was the first series that ever pulled that the whole series was a dream thing.
Mm-hmm.
The only other surprising one, I mean, I don't know, I guess you can technically say spoiler alert, but the other surprising one was the season or the series finale of Newhart, which was Bob Newhart's second show, where he played basically like a hotel clerk kind of thing, or like a bed and breakfast kind of manager or whatever, and everything, and basically they ended that show by having him essentially have a dream about his first show, and it turned out that the whole series was actually the dream of his character from his first show, the Bob Newhart show, which was hilarious. And that's pretty much what they seemed to be doing a little bit with Ahsoka, was that they're making you think that she was killed off when in fact they came up with this way of basically having her survive. And certainly that could be the case too. And if you're going to retcon the sequel trilogy, you almost have to do it this way.
Yeah. I mean, and then, if you remember the end of Rebels, they kind of went into two different portals.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ezra was running. He's like, okay, I got something. I got to go back. And then Ahsoka says, well, I have to, go somewhere else. And so, remember, she went off, and then by the time she finds, she kind of meets back up with Ezra, and Ezra's already gone with Thrawn, but now Ahsoka's more grown up at this point.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we get like the more adult looking Ahsoka, when Sabine kind of comes up, and now Sabine is older, a little bit more. She's cut her hair differently, and at the very end, she kind of walks away with Ahsoka. So I'm thinking that, in the Ahsoka series, that's where we're really going to, and Ronaldo, you bring up a really good point. Like, I think that's where we're really going to find a lot of different mechanisms in Star Wars and how they could kind of retcon some things from the sequel trilogy. I can see how they can, because, Ezra's been gone for a while, so he's going to be an adult at this point. And with his Force abilities, he's also kind of had these, he's always been kind of like a visionary in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Almost kind of like, what's his face from Game of Thrones? The cripple boy. I can't think of his name.
Oh, yeah.
But where he was using like the Raven to kind of see. Well, that's kind of like, I think, where Ezra's kind of Force abilities kind of are lying, where he kind of has this weird, different kind of connection with the Force. And I think he's kind of like this kind of offshoot visionary. So I'm really curious to see what Ahsoka's really going to bring. And especially since that's Filoni's, brainchild.
Sure. And hey, Ronaldo's full of good points tonight. He basically says a crossover formula always works, whether it's Marvel, DC, or CSI. Yeah, I forgot about CSI. And it fits with the interconnected structure of Star Wars. That's another good point, is that it fits with the interconnected structure of Star Wars. Finally, somebody brings this up, because a lot of times people will unfairly, I think, criticize anybody that comes up with the idea of starting to do crossovers. We heard it with flashbacks, things like that. Well, this isn't Star Wars. This isn't what Star Wars is about. And I understand the general sentiment of that statement. However, I think that this is a case to where you can grow the boundaries of Star Wars a little bit, where you can go beyond them just slightly, where you're moving them out a little bit. That there's a difference between arguably what Rian Johnson did versus something like this, because as long as you're still staying true within Star Wars and you're operating within the overall parameters, and pretty much that is that this is a fantasy series, that it's basically the way that George Lucas combined his different influences. So it has that sort of fun 1930s and 40s serials, adventure popcorn movie kind of thing going. And it's told in a very deliberate way, but you can incorporate different things into it without necessarily violating, what Star Wars is about. Now, of course, Ronaldo says, the theory says that the sequels occur in a future where Ahsoka was killed by Vader, while The Mandalorian occurs in a timeline where Ahsoka was rescued by Ezra. And he goes on to say, so it would not be to erase the sequels, it would be more to create two timelines, one in which Ahsoka lives and the other in which he is dead. Now, this is and this actually would fit within JJ's thing, because this is basically what they did with Star Trek. So what ended up happening was at the end of, I don't remember if it was I think it was the second one, Into Darkness, where old Spock basically visits him. Well, he actually visited him, I think, in the first one too, but the second one was the last one. Maybe it was the third. I don't know. But pretty much what they ended up doing was they created two timelines. They had Star Trek Prime and then the new version, right? So now any series that takes place in what they call Star Trek Prime, which is the William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and then, those TV series and pretty much everything that occurred up until the new version of Star Trek came out. Well, I forgot what they ended up doing, and that's why they had old Spock was able to visit the newer Spock pretty much by, it's a different timeline, and that's how they explained it, and that's how they saved him and did all this other stuff. So it basically opened the door to essentially reboot and retcon everything. Like, you didn't have to worry about the continuity of the original series or the Next Generation or anything like that, because it's like, this takes place in a different timeline. It's like a totally alternate universe.
Right.
And I can see what Ronaldo is saying here, because I guess the theory is going that, yes, I never actually heard it put this way, but this would be kind of an interesting thing, is that you could do that. You could say, okay, well, had Ezra not pulled Ahsoka out, the sequel trilogy is basically that future, which is why we get no mention of Ahsoka, we get no mention of Grogu, we get no mention of any of this stuff. And so what they could do now is they could go and they could say, hey, well, here's what really happened.
Yeah, so then now, like, okay, because then now you can kind of almost give an explanation about the whole Palpatine thing too. But see, then it's like, all right, well, Palpatine's really dead, but here's the other, here's what's really, here's the reality of the situation, or here's the other, the other reality of it. Because I remember, in the Rebels episode, Palpatine was actually, because he was trying to get into, because that was the whole premise of that episode. It was really, really well done. It was like this one kind of acolyte, that guy that was kind of working with, he kind of snagged Sabine. And he was trying to figure, because Ezra had already gone in. And so Sabine kind of was one of the ones who kind of could actually read the transcript on the wall. And the acolyte kind of needed her to kind of help. And as Sabine is kind of they're kind of working together, Sabine kind of realizes what's going on, what's happening on that wall. So I'm thinking of a few good men.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help it, man. It's like, you need me on that wall. You want me on that wall.
But while Ezra's in there, Palpatine is actually doing some Sith magic and he himself kind of like at the portal of the world between worlds. He's not actually in it, but he can see into it. And so he's actually like using like this dark side force ability because he's trying to grab Ezra. Because remember, they kept trying to figure out there's something different about Ezra. And everybody kept saying it by this point, like, Kanan kept saying like, well, Ezra's different. There's something different about him. And then even Palpatine kept trying to trick Ezra as far as like, okay, how did you access the world between worlds? I can give you what you're looking for. I can give you your parents. Because remember, that's what he was looking for. The same thing that Rey was looking for. So you kind of see that reoccurring theme. And I'm really curious now to see like, okay, how are they going to really play this out in Ahsoka? Because Palpatine was actually kind of reaching out through the dark side, and he was actually trying to grab Ahsoka, he was actually trying to kill Ahsoka and Ezra. And they went off on two different paths, and Ahsoka kind of jumped into her own universe, and then Ezra was on his way back, to his, destination, which he ended up back with, his friends. And that's how they ended up with, getting caught up with Thrawn. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things that kills me, it almost reminds me of probably one of the most hilarious parts of that whole Star Wars Lego holiday special. When, Palpatine ends up somehow getting into the future or whatever, and then Kylo Ren pops in. It's like, you know what? I like this guy better.
Yeah, exactly.
He's
gonna
actually
throw me down the shaft? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it's like, oh, all right. That was just genius writing, in my opinion. But it's kind of like that, though.
Yeah.
You could start to play a little bit with the future. You can alter the stuff and have it be completely within canon. Now, granted, there's going to be some more old school Star Wars fans that are going to be like, no, this is stupid. And then, of course, you're going to have some who are the casual fans who might be kind of confused about it, where they're going to be like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So now you're telling me that these movies that I saw didn't really happen? And then, of course, the nerd in us is going to go, no, it did happen. But it happened in a different timeline.
Or from a certain point of view.
Right? It's like, this is now the alternate version of that.
Well, I mean, because you have to understand, too, once again, if understanding Star Wars, and we did a show basically where we talked about Palpatine, and we always talked about Palpatine was into stuff like alchemy, dark side magic. That's what the Sith were about. I mean, a lot of the Sith start off in like that dark realm magic. You have the Dathomir witches that we've seen. So that has already been established as a part of Star Wars lore and Clone Wars. So, and in the other books. So, what's her name? Madam.
Oh yeah, I can't
think of her name, but Ronaldo probably knows. But the leader of basically the Dathomir witches, because that's even how like you get like Savage Opress. Like that was all based out of dark side magic basically. So all this type of magic stuff, once again, we're talking about a fantasy world. So I can understand why Palpatine, he's always looking for an edge on the situation. He's always looking for more power. He's always looking for a way to sustain himself. So I can see him thinking like, okay, well, if I can bounce in between worlds, I can conquer stuff, whenever I want. Like I can go over here and I can do this and I can still jump back. I will always survive in another timeline. So it's like I never really die. Once again, he's obsessed with immortality. You guys always have to think about it. That's Palpatine's thing. He never wanted to die. He always wanted to be immortal. So that's why he's always constantly trying to figure out ways to live on in some capacity. And once again, the world between worlds is a great way to do that. And even Yoda even said the future is always in motion. Well, if I can control the future, then I have the ultimate power, because I'm literally controlling destiny itself, which is me having true mastery of the Force, because the Force dictates your destiny.
Okay, but let's be real. Do you think, though, after all that crap that you just said, I mean, don't get me wrong. I get it. It's all true. I'm not actually dogging it out, and you'll understand why I put it that way when I ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of this, not necessarily the world between worlds,
Mm-hmm.
but I think a lot of this is us just going like, look, the sequel trilogy is not what we really had hoped it would be or what we wanted it to be. And here's a nifty little way of making everything work. And this kind of goes into what Ronaldo's saying and continues to. We'll get to the chat in a second. But, everybody is going, well, now we got alternate timelines and we're going to bring in the world between worlds, which is basically in one episode. By the way, Mother Talzin was the leader of the Dathomir Witches. Ronaldo just pointed that out. Thank you. But I think that a lot of this is a reaction to that, and it's the way that at least certain members now of Disney and Lucasfilm are trying to right the ship and bring fans back on board, and they're trying to do essentially damage control.
Yeah.
Which I think is, in a way, I think it's kind of dangerous, but I get it. And I think a lot of times it's hard not to become a Star Wars apologist, as they say, when we're trying to go, no, but it's this timeline. I mean, let's get to this. So Ronaldo's like, in the timeline of the aftermath, Grogu is captured by the Empire because Ahsoka was not there to guide him to Tython, and the First Order was born. And then while in The Mandalorian, she did lead him to Tython, Grogu was not captured, and the First Order was never formed. Although, slow down, because supposedly in The Mandalorian, this is something that was promised in Season 1, and we have no reason to believe that this isn't going to happen. They said that eventually we're going to learn how the First Order was born. We're going to learn how the Empire converted to the First Order. So this, maybe not quite. And then he says, not aftermath, he means the sequel's timeline, which of course makes sense. But then he says, I like this theory, but I don't think it will happen. And that's ultimately, I think it's difficult to say.
Difficult to see the future.
Well, it's one of those things where if you look at this from, it's cliche, but if you do look at this from a certain point of view, you could almost say this looks like it was planned from the very beginning, because a lot of this crap is adding up. We're like, well, wait a minute, way back when they were creating the world between worlds, and, maybe this isn't Disney's lack of planning. In fact, this could be the biggest screw you to all the fans like me or you, where it's like, oh, you didn't think we planned all this? You think that this was all by accident? Well, watch this. Now, granted, I would still say, well, okay, even if you plan this whole overarching storyline, which would be just monumentally coincidental. Mm-hmm. But let's just give the sake of argument. Let's just say, okay, they really did plan all this, which we know they didn't, but let's just say they did. Okay, within the sequel trilogy itself, between 7 and 8 and 8 and 9, they didn't plan that very well. Even if the whole thing was a plan, you could say that they didn't. They just didn't plan it well. But the thing is that it is interesting how this stuff fits. And I always thought, and this is a credit to George Lucas too, because a lot of people are like, you Star Wars fans, how can you explain all this stuff? It's because, unlike in science fiction, when you're dealing with the realm of fantasy is all about being non-specific, really. Mm-hmm. So you could start to interpret events, and you can start to do all this stuff, and there's wiggle room in fantasy where there isn't much in science fiction, because so much has to be explained, and so much is expository writing.
Yeah, it's show and prove in science fiction.
Right, and the whole idea is, because it's science fiction, it's got to be based in some sort of science or whatever. And the same thing goes with a lot of times the plot lines. Again, I mean, it doesn't really have to be, but it often is in science fiction, where everything is more or less defined. And sci-fi fans tend to be a little bit less forgiving about inconsistencies. It's kind of like, well, why is this like this when it shouldn't be? And, you said this in the last episode, but now it's this or whatever. It's like, in fantasy, though, you don't really get that. And this is where George Lucas was just brilliant in the way that he teed everything up, is because you can, even though some of these movies and TV shows and stuff are being made in a lot of cases decades later, you can alter the meaning a little bit of a particular scene, say in the original trilogy, that at that time might have meant one thing, but now can mean something else, and it'll look like it was planned that way from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, what the thing with science fiction is that, it's easy to come up with, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if Luke Skywalker could do this? And you can have those conversations in fantasy. Like, but see, you can't do that with Star Trek. You can't like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if Picard could just, it's like, well, that doesn't make sense because, see, now you're using too much logic at that point.
Well, and this is where Star Trek Discovery is actually getting a lot of crap because they're doing all kinds of things. And keep in mind, in the beginning, this thing's supposed to take place like 10 years before the original series does.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, whoa, you got this like weird spore drive that can, I mean, anybody that's seen Star Trek Discovery is kind of like, okay, how are they explaining all this? And now the original trilogy, listen to me, the original series, people don't have all this. They were clever in the way that they explained it away, but at the same time, it's less wiggle room. You have to try harder, and you have to be more of an apologist of the series, in my opinion. Whereas in something like this, you don't really have to. And not to mention the fact that it's broad strokes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much finely detailed. And I think that you can get away from that. So I personally think that the Ahsoka series is going to be really exciting. And it could... it pains me to say this, but it could actually eclipse The Mandalorian.
I was literally, when I say when you took the words exactly out of my mouth, dude, like I was just about to say that. Like, I think it can because you're dealing with too much weight on that side, whereas The Mandalorian, it's kind of open territory, but when you're dealing with Ahsoka, now you're dealing with more concrete people that have backstory that we already know.
Yeah, well, I mean, another argument that you can make on that, too, is the fact that, The Mandalorian is more of a new show, new characters. It's incorporating some of the familiar characters, but more or less into a new timeline, establishing a new main lead character. Whereas you flip over to the Ahsoka series, like you said, now you're bringing in a bunch of people from Rebels. You've got, the Clone Wars. I mean... This is a firmly established universe continuing on with story arcs that were set up already.
Right.
So, in essence, it's more of a sequel to something than a brand new show. So, I mean, I think it could. Before moving on, let's take this last one here from Ronaldo. He says, I think an argument can be made to say that in the timeline where Ahsoka is alive, the First Order is a different version with a different origin. Well, sure. I mean, it could be fair to say because it's relatively undefined. They haven't come up with how the Empire transitioned into the First Order yet. Keep in mind with The Mandalorian, we're basically 6 years into the fall of the Empire. This isn't taking place just a couple of weeks after the Death Star blew up, the second one I'm talking about. This is taking place like 6 years afterwards, and we're still not really sure how many weeks or years or whatever the Mandalorian seasons are taking place. I mean, considering the first season only had like 25-minute episodes or something, I would probably say that, that might have been a 2 or 3 week time period. But even if it was, we don't really know how long in between the seasons is going to be. And we don't know how long season 3 in totality took, or
Right.
2 rather. And we don't know going into season 3 how much time is going to pass. So
Yeah, because we see, season 1, Grief Karga's got just a black mustache. Season 2, he's sporting a whole goatee that's gray.
yeah, I mean,
He
it's
looks older already.
yeah, it's just one of those things that we just don't really know, what's happening. So until they actually come out with something that lets us know, because it's amazing that the Empire is still around, even though it's just remnants at this point, it's still around.
Mm-hmm.
which means that it's not going to transition to the First Order for a while. So even though, Ronaldo, you make a fair point, it's equally fair to say that, look, we don't know. Anything's possible, I guess. All right, so whatever you guys are thinking about the Ahsoka series, what do you think about Thrawn being cast as a guy who did the voice of Thrawn in Rebels? What do you think of the direction and a lot of the other stuff that we talked about? Put it in the comment section. Let's start a discussion. All right, what do we got next?
All right, next we have Ubisoft has teased there could be a Mandalorian game.
Now this one, I have to admit, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
So, but here's what's interesting to me. And maybe I'll just go ahead and kick this off for a second before you get into the article. And also give you time to find any details just in case you may have lost them.
All right.
I know. I'm sorry.
Gotta find a tractor beam to grab.
Yeah, I know.
Things back.
Hey, watch out, man. I got my thermal detonator here. I'm not afraid to use it. But here's what's interesting to me about this whole Mandalorian game from Ubisoft, right? Is that Lucasfilm just came out and announced that they got this whole Lucasfilm Games thing happening now. And I find it a little strange because, again, I didn't read this. And I pray you didn't get this from We Got This Covered, because you know how I feel about that site. Pretty much the same way everybody does, is that they're terrible. Don't get me wrong, they got some entertaining stuff, but usually it's totally wrong, and it's not even worth reporting their crap, to be honest. About the only time that I would ever do anything with We Got This Covered is if it's kind of like they come up with some weird, outlandish, type of thing that was right up there with, like, Snoke is actually Mace Windu or something like that. One of those, like, fun, speculative type of things where you're like, all right, well, yeah, let's talk about this because this will just be a fun discussion. But honestly, I haven't heard this, and it's really weird that they make this announcement, but yet Ubisoft is coming out with this game. So,
well, it's speculated that it may be the Mandalorian. It has not been confirmed. But it's supposed to be some what do you call it? The open. I can't think of the name. Open, like what? It's like a
debut.
No, you have like the it's like an open world type thing where you can kind of like just choose your own adventure type.
Oh, that's kind of it. Open world games.
Yeah.
Are they saying that it's a Star Wars game though, and they're just speculating it's a Mandalorian, or?
Yeah, I think that's what was happening here. So they're kind of teasing that, and everybody thinks it's the Mandalorian, of course, because of the height of the game. And of the show, and it makes sense because of how the Mandalorian show operates. He's bouncing all over the place, all these different galaxies, or in different systems and all that type of stuff. So I can see him doing these bounties and running into all these different types of people. So if they do create this game, because I remember you had the bounty hunter, the Jango Fett game years ago on what was that game?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes,
they never had a Jango Fett game.
What was the game that you played? We had it at the studio. It was like a bounty hunter game.
They had the original Battlefront 2 or Battlefront.
No, man, you had the.
I had a bounty hunter game?
Yeah.
On what system? I didn't get the PlayStation. I didn't get the PS4 until like 2000. Oh, what year was that? 14, 13, somewhere in there. And I didn't have a game system before that. I had the computer.
It was on the GameCube. Didn't you have the GameCube?
Oh, I did have a GameCube.
See?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Now,
don't make me look crazy on live, man. Please don't do this to me.
Oh, man, I forgot all about that.
Yeah, like, don't do that.
You're right. They did have a GameCube game that was...
it was called, it was Bounty Hunter, and it had Django on it. And I remember we used to bring it into the studio, and we, like, on our, like, breaks and stuff.
Apparently I did.
There we go. Yes. So I wonder if it's going to be something kind of similar to how that was.
I wonder too.
You don't remember the game? You don't even remember the game
Well, I
now.
mean, I actually do vaguely remember. I mean, again, my memory isn't like if I went on YouTube or something and watched it, I'd probably be like, oh yeah, I remember that game. But yeah, I mean, chances are I'm not going to be the most accurate source of information if we're comparing games here, even though I owned it. But man, I hadn't owned the GameCube and
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah.
it's been a minute. Like I forgot. Like I had the Wii for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I forgot it was kind of like I don't know, like mid to late 2000s or whenever the GameCube was sort of at its peak.
Yeah.
I ended up getting
I
one
want to say like 04 or
because
something around there.
Jim had one. He was the one that actually sort of convinced me to get it. I played it at his house, and I'm like, hey, this thing's actually pretty cool. And so I ended up going out and getting it, and it was. I still say the GameCube was great because it had those like little mini discs, like what they used to. For CDs, I mean, before the show went on, you and I were talking about how cassettes are actually starting to come back, which I can't even imagine why cassettes would come back. But another thing that they did was when CDs first came out, they actually had these like little tiny, little itty bitty ones. And what they were trying to do was actually bring like the old 45s type of thing back. So they were putting singles on these little CDs, basically, and that's what ended up what they put the GameCube games on, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah, I mean, it was a good system with good graphics, but it could be. I mean, this game could actually be something similar. I would prefer it, like you said, though, actually be a Mandalorian. First of all, I think the Mandalorian would be ripe for a video game series.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean, and you can make all kinds of different games, but first of all, if you just give me an open world game that's even similar to the Knights of the Old Republic games, but maybe even be more so, although that was pretty open world, I mean, I will say, but like you give me a Star Wars game that's in the same vein as the Elder Scrolls games,
yeah,
I'm totally there, man.
Yeah,
and I don't even
think
care what the subject matter is.
Well, that's
either.
what I think. That's what they're kind of liking it to. It's pretty much kind of like your Elder Scrolls, God of War. So I think that that would be a really cool thing because, like I said, with the Mandalorian, just the nature of the show is very open world and just kind of like I can see him flying to different places, you know, like Trask, or he's flying to Navarro, or he's going here, he's going there, and he's got to pick up stuff. He's got to fix his ship. He's got to do. I mean, it's kind of like. I mean, the Mandalorian is kind of like one big giant open world video game. Just, you know, you're just kind of watching it really. But I think this would be really cool. You know, compared to your typical stuff like Battlefront. What's the Rogue Squadron games?
Yeah, well, that's
stuff that has like a set story.
Right. That's basically it. Is that we have enough of those type of games. Not since Knights of the Old Republic. I mean, there's the online Old Republic game that they have that's kind of like that, but not since Knights of the Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic 2 have we had an RPG-style game, much less one that's like massively open world, like, say, like the Elder Scrolls game. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the Mandalorian, if you're going to make anything about it, that would be the series upon which you can base a game because, let's face it, it's right now we're almost watching a game because we have no idea from week to week where the Mandalorian's going, what he's doing. I mean, even when he was taking the child back, it was basically just, okay, I'm going to go and talk. It's almost like, they're taking side quests and...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean,
that's what I'm saying. It's
totally
just
like it was basically like watching an open world RPG game.
Yep.
Completely. And I mean, I've been saying that for years. Like, they need to come up with something that's really, really well thought out. I think that's the problem. It needs to be well thought out. Ronaldo says, it has all the sense of the world. Mandalorian is the most popular show on the planet. A game would not hurt. Yeah, that's another thing. That's another good point, too, is that if you're going to base a game on anything right now, I think The Mandalorian is probably the smartest bet that you can make because it's got wild popularity right now.
Yep.
Everybody thinks it's great. It would be the perfect subject matter for a game of that type, but that's the direction they're going. So
Sure. I mean, it's like you said, with all the different side quests they've had, like the whole crate dragon thing, I could see you trying to do that. You're trying to rescue some little town that needs, your help, and you need to fix your ship. So, all right, I'll do this mission for you. I mean, he was doing that on the show all the time. So I'm like, yeah, that's perfect in a RPG game.
well, not to mention the fact that, you can even do... So even when they had those stupid little filler episodes, like the weird spiders on that ice planet, I mean, that could be something of that. Ronaldo says, maybe not a popular opinion, but I hate that bounty hunter game. It drove me crazy. You know what? It's not really unpopular or popular to me because I honestly don't even remember the game at this point. So maybe it drove me I mean, I don't know. You seem to remember better than I do. You're all like, yeah, we used to bring it in and, we'd play it on breaks. And I mean, oddly enough, I remember, what'd you have, the PS2?
I had the Xbox.
The Xbox. And I remember you brought the Obi-Wan game in.
Yep.
That I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably before I did this.
It was actually around because I had the Revenge of the Sith game too.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, which that would have come out probably like 06 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, did I seem to enjoy the Bounty Hunter game? I mean,
Well, yeah. I mean, you have
but something I like doing? I mean,
it was one of those things that you like because, one, it wasn't like your typical, Star Wars thing where you're a Jedi and you're doing that thing. It was the whole bounty hunter experience. So
yeah, but what did it look like?
Well, you played as Django, pretty much.
Okay.
And it was kind of like an open world, but definitely wasn't like a real true RPG, but it had like all these different little quests to it. And you could of course you had to, up your weapons and stuff like that. And,
It almost sounds like what it could have been like, which is something I didn't totally finish it, but I loved it, was the campaign of Battlefront 2, like the latest one. And the graphics of both Battlefront and Battlefront 2 are just astounding. But the problem was the first Battlefront of the new series I'm talking about, was just almost unplayable. Its playability was really kind of wonky. It was not very good at all. But the Battlefront 2, they totally improved it.
Yeah, I heard that. A lot of people kind of were complaining about the same issue.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd be all about it, personally. I think that you give me a game that's based in The Mandalorian, I'd be totally fine with it.
All right.
But let us know, as usual, in the comments section what you guys are thinking. What kind of a video game do you want to see out of Star Wars? Do you want to see more of like what we've gotten, like your Rogue Squadron, your Jedi Fallen Orders, your Battlefront 2s, all the general games that we've already had, or do you actually want something like an RPG game that would be amazing? Like Ronaldo says, it's amazing that they have never made a new open world game. The entire Star Wars universe, with all its worlds and planets, is perfect for an open world format. So what are you guys thinking? You want an open world game? And if you do, let us know where you want it set. Do you want to see a Mandalorian-based one? Maybe you want to see a Jedi-based one? Let us know in the comments section. All right, what do we got next?
Next, we have Qui-Gon could be popping up in Obi-Wan.
Yeah, I know, it's so funny. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. It really knocks it out of the park where you're talking about, like, okay, these names are pretty similar. They even have the hyphens in the same spot, but yeah, man. To me, that seems relatively obvious. Obviously, it'd have to be in Force Ghost form unless they were doing flashbacks. But
yeah,
what are they saying?
Well, basically, Liam Neeson, they made mention to him about the Obi-Wan series and would he actually want to come back and actually play that character, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I love it." And I've always loved the character of Qui-Gon. I mean, he's actually kind of one of my favorite, even though we only got him in one movie. Like, just the way that he and Liam Neeson, to me, played him perfectly. Because he's kind of that serious Jedi master, but at the same time, we always talk about he kind of goes off the cuff and, he kind of does his own thing when need be. But he's wise enough to know when to break the rules and when not to. And so, of course, that dynamic between he and Obi-Wan makes more sense. But see, this would be really interesting to me because how does Qui-Gon now? It's like, okay, I trusted you with Anakin. What the heck happened? Because if he's popping up in the Anakin series, the Obi-Wan series, and now Anakin's Vader, of course, Qui-Gon knows this at this point. So, that's got to be the first question. Like, so what happened, dude? Like, I gave you the kid. I thought I trained you pretty well. Does Qui-Gon feel guilty? Like, well, maybe I shouldn't have, maybe I should have told you this, or maybe I shouldn't have pushed that on you, or, like, I really would love to see what those conversations would be like between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. And of course, Obi-Wan is going to feel like, okay, I failed you, Master. I failed, everybody, and look what it's cost us. The whole Republic is gone, and a big portion of that is due to Anakin. So I would love to see how those conversations will go, and if if Obi-Wan is kind of going through that that depressed, disillusioned state that kind of like Luke was in Last Jedi, does Qui-Gon kind of help bring him back, just like Yoda brought Luke back?
Well, there's a lot of good questions in that. I mean, first of all, I never even thought about it, but yeah, it would be so hilarious if it's like, really, dude? I mean, the kid was kind of cool. Yeah, he was a little angry at times, but now he's, like this Dark Lord, powerful Dark Lord of the Sith. What happened? And don't give me any of that from a certain point of view crap either. It's like, that doesn't work on me. But there's a lot of good points that you make in the sense of, number one, Qui-Gon, to me, other than Maul, which is another character that at least until, the Clone Wars, now Maul is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Maul is like almost fighting with 3PO, who's in the most movies or whatever. It's like Darth Maul pops up literally everywhere now.
Yep.
But at the time, this was a single movie appearance, and he made a really big impression, obviously, because everybody wanted him back. In my opinion, Liam Neeson is mostly what actually made The Phantom Menace really good.
Absolutely.
The character of Qui-Gon's amazing, as you know. And, of course, since both of us actually read Master and Apprentice, that really deepens the Qui-Gon character. That really, I don't know, it seems to go, it seems to delve a little bit deeper into what we already know about him in The Phantom Menace, but at the same time, it gives us a bunch of backstory. So as much as we love Liam Neeson in The Phantom Menace, we love him even more because of that book. And it shows that there's depth in there. It also shows that, yes, if he were to meet Obi-Wan again, even as a Force ghost, would there be any kind of a guilty feeling, or kind of like what you just postulated, what would it be like for Obi-Wan? Is he going through the same kind of emotions that Luke went through? But now, much like you said, Yoda pretty much bringing him back, maybe Qui-Gon had to bring him back, because this is something that we really never, we don't really have too much in even the new canon, and we don't have a whole lot even in the expanded universe about the time between 3 and 4 where Obi-Wan was concerned.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really know a whole lot about what he's going through. I mean, the prequels did give us a little bit of a, okay, you're going to train, you're going to take care of him. In other words, the setup.
Mm-hmm.
But we never really get the payoff. In fact, if you look at the end of, say, episode 3, where they're doing their whole thing, right? And then, of course, the beginning of 4, it reminds me very much of the end of 2, beginning of 3, because at the end of episode 2, we're getting the very beginning of the Clone Wars. It's kind of like the start of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, by the time of Revenge of the Sith, it's like, oh, well, now the Clone Wars is kind of over, pretty much, and it's transitioning to the Empire in a very rapid pace.
Mm-hmm.
But what I find interesting is that you don't really understand how it got there. Now, granted, now we're getting all kinds of material on that. But in Obi-Wan, it's kind of a similar thing. With the Obi-Wan thing, you're getting, okay, episode 3 It's like, yep, you're going to take Luke, put him with Owen and Beru. You're going to watch over him. I got some training for you. Here's a couple of workbooks. I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, here's your homework. Here's some quizzes I want you to take. Some forms you got to fill out. All this stuff that he's supposed to do, right? And then, of course, by the time we meet him in A New Hope, it's like, okay, now he's the wise and old guy that's basically taking care of Luke, and Luke meets him, and now he's kind of like a surrogate Yoda at this point, right? He's training him up. He's about to almost lose another one to the dark side, basically. But the point being is that we don't really have a whole lot in between. And I think that the fact that the Obi-Wan, and this is, I've been making the argument for an Obi-Wan series for years at this point. And I think that one of the things that we could safely say is that with Qui-Gon's appearance, or rumored appearance, because is this confirmed yet or not?
About
Qui-Gon being in it.
No.
I know that, and I know that Liam Neeson, and of course he wants to play him again, because the Qui-Gon character is actually really cool. And in fact, he's similar to some of the other characters that Liam Neeson plays. There's the toughness, there's the, no nonsense part of it. But in a lot of ways, he's very different.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Qui-Gon is that he's tough, he's smart, yet he's still, he has that sensitive side. He has a softer side to him. As you see different parts in the Phantom Menace where, even when he's just taking the time to explain to Anakin like what midichlorians are, just that it's like, oh, well, what are midichlorians? Oh, well, midichlorians. It's kind of like you kind of have that father-son moment, like you really kind of get to see that, and I think Qui-Gon sees a lot of himself in Anakin, because Anakin was more like, okay, well, let's just go for it. Let's just try it. Let's do it. And that's kind of how Qui-Gon is. He's more like, all right, I'm willing to take those chances. Whereas Obi-Wan is a little bit more like, now, wait a minute. Let's think about this. Let's plan.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you really think about it, when you look at the way Anakin is, he's like Qui-Gon on steroids.
Yeah.
He's just kind of hopped up on a little bit of fear and anger and attachment and all this, some of the dark side-y type stuff. But I mean, there's a lot of similarities definitely between Qui-Gon and Anakin. And that's why I think that, and we've said this on multiple shows, we may have even almost dedicated a show to this, certainly a segment to it, where if Anakin had been taught by Qui-Gon instead of Obi-Wan, things may have gone a little bit differently.
I want to also, if Qui-Gon does pop up in the Obi-Wan series, I wonder if they're going to deal with or address Dooku.
Yeah, I mean, this is a way that you can actually sort of tie in some of the prequel stuff with the original trilogy stuff, because once again, Dooku is weirdly absent from any mention. Yeah. I mean, even though granted so is Maul, I guess, but
well, I mean, Dooku being a former Jedi, two being Qui-Gon's master.
This is why I just think that Luke should have gotten more information from Yoda on Dagobah. Like, hey man, I mean, here's kind of how some, now again, I know there's some nerd out there that's probably going to be like, well, he was out there for a couple of weeks. We don't know. We don't have record of every conversation. And that's fair. That's 100% accurate. I understand that. Absolutely right. For all we know, Yoda could have been instructing him.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, because remember there's that one scene where Dooku's like, if Qui-Gon was still here, and he's like, well, Qui-Gon would have never joined you. He was like, well, you don't know. You don't really know that. You really don't know your master like you think you do, basically.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting. Well, and again, besides the Phantom Menace, I think, and I never really thought about it this way, the Master and Apprentice novel really affects that scene quite a bit.
It does. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that it would really be interesting to see what those conversations would be like between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. And then you got to wonder, like, because at the end of 3, you know, Yoda says to Obi-Wan, on Tatooine, more training I have for you. He's like, training? He's like, yeah, from your old master. He's like, Qui-Gon? He's like, yep. Teach you how to commune with him, I will. So he's just like, huh? Now, you have to think about this, though. So, and you kind of alluded to it that, all right, Obi-Wan was placed Anakin was placed in Obi-Wan's hands originally. Lost him. Now you have Luke in his hands. So you got to wonder, like, okay, is Obi-Wan really going to ask Qui-Gon, like, okay, what should I do? And maybe that's the reason why he came up with that whole, well, don't tell him that his father is this. Like, maybe that was a Qui-Gon thing and not just an Obi-Wan thing.
So basically what you're saying is, hey, Obi-Wan, we're going to teach you this little game called From a Certain Point of View.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how you're going to talk to the kid or whatever and not tell him everything that's going on. I mean, I kind of like it.
This can happen because it's like, well, because I could see the fear. I could understand because Obi-Wan really hasn't had much fear. But now that he knows that, like, okay, well, Anakin is like running the galaxy with Palpatine now. He knows how powerful Anakin is. So now it's like, because he's trained him as a Jedi, and then now he's faced off with him as a Sith Lord. Now, of course, over time, he knows Anakin's only going to get stronger as Vader. So he's kind of like, okay, well, I have a son of the same blood, so his son is going to be powerful. Once again, I'm going to be put in charge of him. What do I do? Because I screwed up the last time. At least that's how Obi-Wan's probably going to feel, especially at the very beginning. Now, closer to you get to 4, it may change.
Well, did they confirm how many? Was it supposed to be like 6 episodes or something? Or
yeah, it's like limited.
See, and that's the thing is that they have a lot that they have to put. I mean, I remember at one point there were a lot of people going, well, I don't know, man. What are we going to see? He's making his weekly trips to the Mos Eisley market or something. I mean, a lot of people didn't think there was a whole lot of story there. And I've been telling people for years, like, guys, there's a lot really in there. And even though I agree that the Obi-Wan series should be a limited series, unless you make each episode like an hour, I'm hoping that they can cram all this stuff in just 6 episodes.
Well, you will have to jump time a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, they're already talking about Hayden Christensen being in this thing.
Yeah.
Now they might bring in Qui-Gon, which, don't get me wrong, it all makes sense. I mean, they need to do that, actually, because these are things that I think are very key to the story. Like you said, Qui-Gon thing was set up in episode 3.
Well, the only thing, I guess, is we have to figure out at what point does this story start to take place, because we last saw in 3, okay, Yoda's telling, Obi-Wan, okay, more training I have for you on, Tatooine. Okay, so does he just immediately lands on Tatooine and Qui-Gon appears? Or is this going to take place maybe, because like when we see it in Rebels when he kills Maul, he's definitely gray. Mm-hmm. He's definitely that old wizened guy.
Well, that's because
but Luke
at that
is
point,
still relatively young, though. He's still super young.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, at what point does Qui-Gon pop up? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, are we?
Well, we have to. It's like you said. We have to know when this thing is starting, but we also have to know when it's ending.
True.
Because the scenes that you're talking about in Rebels, this is bumping up pretty close to episode 4. Because first of all, the whole Rebels series only takes place like, I don't know, like a couple of years or something beforehand. And the whole idea at first was they were going to actually have the ending of Rebels bump right up against episode 3, which oddly enough, that was what they did with the season 7 of the Clone Wars. And in fact, not only did it bump up against, it kind of went all the way in. I mean, it was like the final third of the movie or something is where the Clone Wars is ending. So that was really cool to see. So they could do something like that, where either they overlap 3 with Obi-Wan or 4 with Obi-Wan. If I had to guess, I would say that it probably it's kind of going to be like right in the middle. And in fact, I think that we even read something about that, where I think he said it was going to take place 10 years after episode 3. And that would put it 9 years before episode 4. Or something to that effect. So, yeah, in fact, it's coming back to me now. I remember that they basically had said that it was going to take place about 10 years after that. So that's a really good place because it's long enough for Obi-Wan to have been established. But it's not too far up against 4. I would have been a little bit disappointed if it was too close to 4.
Gotcha.
But Ronaldo says, I could see Qui-Gon saying, I told you to protect the boy, and I still ask the same of you. I think that even with everything that happened, he still thinks that Anakin is the chosen one. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't really think any... It would be interesting, though, if Qui-Gon could pop up to Vader. Like, dude, what? Really?
Why did you listen to Obi-Wan?
It's like, I bet you know what midi-chlorians are now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I mean...
Don't have so many now, do you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would kind of be interesting to see Vader facing Qui-Gon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because that would have to be sort of weird.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that they're doing more in the comic books now. They're actually doing a little bit more of Vader facing some characters from his past when he was Anakin. Like, there's that big thing where he fights and ends up killing Jocasta Nu. And, you know, I mean, she was fierce, man. I mean, you talk about a warrior to the end. You really realize how powerful this woman was when, you know, this face-off happens. But,
wow.
I mean, everything from that to, of course, Dorme, you know, the handmaiden decoy, to Captain Typho. You know, like all these people from his past, you know, that he has to face. And then, of course, there's something which, I don't know if I actually read the comic or not. I think I did, where he saw a 3PO, you know, in the pile, the Ugnaughts or something like that. And he kind of, you know, has his head up against, I mean, he's remembering. And what's cool about it is that they're showing the moments where Vader is having a little bit of an emotional twinge from who he used to be, which I think is kind of realistic. I mean, because everybody kept sensing the good in him. Everybody kept sensing, you know, all this stuff. It wasn't like Vader turned totally evil. He wasn't quite tempted by the light the same way that Kylo was. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you could tell that he was working to keep any of those feelings from...
Palpatine.
Yeah, from Palpatine, or from coming up too much and weakening him.
All right.
But, you know, I think that it would be kind of cool if they have Qui-Gon come back. In fact, I was really surprised that they were confirming that Hayden Christensen was coming back, but they didn't confirm that Liam Neeson was coming back, because just from a pure on-the-surface story perspective, Qui-Gon coming back makes a lot more sense than Vader does.
Well, I think Qui-Gon, they may be keeping it under wraps. Like, they kind of want it to be a surprise type thing.
Yeah, and I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, having Vader in the story is not a mistake or anything like that. I mean, it makes perfect sense, actually, because Vader is around, and there is even a possibility that they can face off without it ruining the canon too much of 4. I think that a lot of people unfairly say that, you know, well, you can't have that because if it does, it ruins the canon of 4, and on it goes. Not necessarily. I mean, it could do that. It could ruin it. It just depends on how they do it. It's like anything else. Yep. If you tell the story well, everything will be fine.
Right. Absolutely.
All right, but I mean, what do you guys think? Are you guys all about Qui-Gon appearing in Obi-Wan, or do you think that, you know, maybe the Obi-Wan series should stand on its own? Let us know what you guys think in the comment section. All right, I think it's time for
your favorite.
My favorite. All right, here we go. It's time to clear your mind. That's right. This is where you guys submit questions to us. We pick 2 of those questions, and we read them on the episode and answer them. So who's our first person?
The first question comes from Gabrielle H. And her question is, why do you think they didn't bring Sabine into Mandalorian Season 2? Do you think using Sasha Banks was a waste of talent?
So it's kind of a 2-parter then.
Yes.
It kind of counts as 2, but all right, we'll let this go because it's from the same person. No, we kind of, the Sabine thing, we sort of covered a little bit earlier in the show, but yeah, I think that that's perfectly fine. I think with the Mandalorian itself, it makes sense to have Sabine in it, but if they put her in Ahsoka, I think it makes perfect sense, even more sense in some cases, to have her in Ahsoka, and I think it's pretty cool. As far as Sasha Banks, I don't know if I would really, as an actress, say that there's a talent there. I mean, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong. I mean, I know it sounds like I'm throwing a ton of shade here, but I'm not. But
Eric shot first.
But what I mean is, like, she basically played a particular role. I thought she played it well. I don't really think it's a waste. Somebody had to do it. You needed somebody that had the kind of physicality that she brought. And, I mean, Well, I can't say that I was really 100% invested in her character, really, because they didn't give us a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I feel it was kind of a waste. I think if you're going to bring somebody in like Sasha Banks.
Okay, I could see from that standpoint.
Yeah, because it's like no different than you bringing, Gina Carano. Like you could have picked anybody to, there's tons of women stunt actors. Like, why her? You know what I'm saying? Like, to really.
Well, but they had more of a thing going because, she's been in some other stuff. They liked the fact that she was somewhat physically imposing, but she still has a femininity about her, and, she embodied. And, I mean, it wasn't like they didn't audition other people. They did. She just kind of won the role. I mean, I would say that she was less of a waste than Sasha Banks.
Well, no, I mean, I think
the reasons that you say, it's kind of like, well, are you just trying to get some marquee name to...
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think with Sasha, I think you could have utilized her because we all thought that she was going to play Sabine, and it would have fit her character profile from, the WWE.
Well, now it makes you wonder who they are going to get to play Sabine.
Exactly. That's my point. It's like, I think you really wasted, because I think that would have been a really good one. But then again, they've been pretty spot on with picking really good people, bringing Tamira Morrison back to play, Boba Fett. You got, Katie Sackhoff, playing, Bo-Katan. They knocked it out the park with Giancarlo Esposito playing Moff Gideon. So, I mean, they've been doing Bill Burr. I mean, all these guys and women that they brought into the show have done phenomenally. So unless they have something more for that particular character that Sasha Banks does play, maybe in season 3, then
yeah, you got to remember. I mean, not everybody can. The other thing too is not everybody can be monumental. Not everybody has to be the Mandalorian or Luke Skywalker or something like that. I mean, occasionally you have. But, I mean, I know what you're saying. It's if you look at Bill Burr's character,
right,
that was more of a balance.
Mm-hmm.
That was not a waste of talent.
Nope.
Or that that guy that would tag along, that he initially froze in carbonite in the beginning, but went along on the
weird blue guy.
The whole, comic relief guy. That was cool. See, that was, so I understand. But I don't know. I think it remains to be seen because this could actually be a setup. This could be like, okay, we're introducing her in season 2, but in season 3, we're really going to do some stuff.
Right. So I think we just have to kind of...
Yeah, it's a wait and see.
Waiting patiently.
All right. Well, who's next?
All right. Next, we have Vernon Culligan. His question is, do you think a Luke Skywalker movie or series set post Return of the Jedi is needed, or should we just accept what we got in the sequel trilogy?
Well, now if you're saying is a Luke Skywalker series necessary?
Right.
I mean, the answer obviously is no. I mean, it's in the same way that the Solo a Star Wars story wasn't necessary, but I would say a Luke Skywalker series I would actually make the argument that it is necessary.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think it's more necessary than a Solo series.
Way more. But I mean, I would even if you don't take that comparison, right? I still say it's necessary because there's a lot of key things that happen. Especially you go all the way back to the expanded universe, and you're coming in even in the new canon now, right? And you have a lot of world building that's going on now. Unlike the expanded universe, the new canon hasn't quite addressed what Luke was doing right after Return of the Jedi and how he built up the Jedi Temple. But we do know that he did rebuild the Jedi Order, and then, of course, Ben Solo betrayed him, became Kylo Ren, on and on it goes. But certainly the expanded universe fleshed it out quite a bit more, deeply, actually. So I think that you really have to, and this is going to kind of sound like a cop-out in a way, but I think you almost have to define necessary because in reality, no, it's not really necessary. I mean, even all the stuff that happens in the expanded universe technically isn't canon, not according to Lucas anyway. So, it's good enough actually to go from, especially now that you have the sequel trilogy, you can go from episode 6 to episode 7, and it jibes beautifully. But if you're saying necessary as far as, hey, you have a character here that plays a very key role in this universe that you, in order to tell some of the stories that you're going to tell, you almost have to. That's why they brought him into the season finale of The Mandalorian, because if you're telling stuff around this time period, it would actually be more criminal if you don't include Luke. Because, look, if you got a bunch of Jedi and you got all this stuff running around, Luke has got to be part of that equation.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's necessary. I think it's more necessary just simply because you can kind of see, you could add or expound upon the whole situation that we saw in Last Jedi where, okay, if you want to show a little bit closer to Force Awakens where he's training Kylo and, he starts to see some of the darkness in him. He's starting to see some of those things where it's like, I don't know. But then again, the only problem with that, you might have to show, I guess you can still get around it without showing Leia because, she could be off doing some diplomatic thing or whatever.
Yeah, that would be easy enough.
So, but I think you could definitely show that aspect. You could definitely show how, especially if you want to see how Snoke kind of got his hands into Kylo to begin with, or where
that's
Snoke
what I'm
even
saying.
came from. There's a lot of things that, and
there's just stuff that you got to show now.
Yeah, and especially with Luke being like, okay, he is the hero of the original trilogy. Yes, Han, Leia, Lando, they all played their roles, but Luke Skywalker is the focal point. So it's like, what happened to this great hero? You see him.
Well, it's not even that. It's like what happened to the Jedi Order.
That's what I'm saying.
And that's, leave off on a really big spot, right? He's the key to the entire thing.
Right.
So, let's see. Basically, Ronaldo says, almost lost it there. According to how the series went, I have no problem with Sabine's absence. And then he goes on to say that he agrees with me. I'm not saying that Sasha Banks is a bad actress or anything like that. I think she did a great job, but I think you need an actress with a little more experience. And that's totally fair. That's kind of what I was saying. He says, I think it is not necessary. We're going into the Luke thing now. But it would not hurt. There is a lot of time to explore regarding what Luke did between episodes 6 and 7. And I think that, that pretty much summarizes what we've been talking about, that it would be really hard to tell Star Wars stories that take place after episode 6 without somehow including Luke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking anyway. But, as always, we leave it up to you guys. What are you guys thinking? Do you think, we know what Ronaldo thinks because he's chatting it in. And like Ronaldo, you guys can chat live with us during the whole show. If you guys are watching, don't be shy. Jump in the conversation, because the more people that we got chatting in, the more variety of conversation. Remember that one chat that just was crazy? It was like,
oh yeah,
ton of different people, and it's like,
hard
whoa.
to keep up with them.
It was. Well, there was one actually when I was doing it on my own.
Oh yeah.
Where it was insane. It was like, it wasn't just the amount of chats, but it's the different people that were chatting. It's just like, because we'll have a lot of people watching the show, but it's usually the same 3, 4, 5, 6 people that always chat, right? But this time it was insane. And it was tough for me to keep up, and it was wide ranging, but it made the show interesting. So if you guys like what you're seeing, be sure to check us out every Friday at 8 p.m. We do it live. We also do it live again on Mondays at 8, where we talk about a single topic. And if you guys have anything that you'd like to suggest for us to talk about, we would absolutely love it if you guys would put that in the comments section right now. So if you guys are liking these videos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you know when we do come out with new videos. Make sure that you hit us up on our social media sites at HeadToHeadSW. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And with that, we are going to wrap it up. We're going to see you again Monday at 8 o'clock. I haven't really decided what we were going to do, but I got that bounty hunters thing if you want to do the top 10 bounty hunters. I mean, it's up to you.
Or we could review the bounty hunter game.
Well, we'll see. Either way, tune in at 8. You'll find out what it is that we're going to talk about. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.